sort of a lecture slash hands-on of actually sort of learning some of these methodologies. And then later, we're probably going to end up doing a processing unit, and it'll probably just be a few hours or something more of the afternoon. So you guys get,
monitoring.
so we'll just have to play that one by ear and see how it goes, especially when we're doing this. So this is probably one of the more informal type lectures, and just because of the nature where we're at. So we'll talk for a little while about a methodology, maybe two, and then we'll go grab the stuff, all the tools that we would use, and we'll just go outside and do it, and then we'll come back in and learn another one, and then go back outside and do it. I think it's better. What we've done in the past is just kind of learn it all in the morning and then go out in the afternoon and do it. But I like to do it just kind of one at a time. It gets us in and out of the classroom. This is also fairly informal versus sort of like the formal lectures I do normally. And hopefully I'm prepared enough. This one can be a challenge to prepare for sometimes. So you guys, I just got to be honest with you. I'm not saying I'm unprepared, but I'm not as prepared for this lecture as I normally am, just because of having to slam through everything last week and then having to consolidate this week. But I've taught this lecture 3 or 4 times, so I'm not so worried about it. I guess I'm just trying to hedge my bets here a little bit. You guys are good with that, right?
Yep.
I appreciate your understanding. Let's see what else. Something else I was going to say. Oh, I was going to ask, I know we talked a little bit about yesterday. Was there any more feedback about yesterday's lecture or anything that you would have liked to learn more about, or things that you actually picked up on? Because I want to provide that feedback to Dan, because he actually asked for feedback a lot for his lectures and stuff. I was surprised he didn't do it yesterday. I can go through it.
He was talking a lot about evacuation corridors
Mm-hmm.
and the treatments that go in with that, but I understand the concept, but I don't understand the difference between a regular treatment area and an evacuation corridor.
An actual evacuation corridor? Yeah. Oh, okay, that's a great question, actually. Well, what did you take away from it in terms of how you interpreted?
What I understood was that there was already an easement, and okay, it would be like an easement, and then there would be something that the owner of that easement would have to take care of, I think 30 feet, and then that's where our treatment would start. That's what I kind of understood about it, but I didn't understand necessarily how long they could be. Like, let's say Carve Acres, perfect example.
It's a great example.
If we were to do an evacuation corridor off of that, what would be feasibly the maximum length of that versus also what the owner of that is technically responsible for.
Right. What do you mean length? Are you talking about length? Are you talking about like the width of the fuel break actually? Or are you talking about the length?
Well, I understand that could fluctuate,
Yeah.
but let's say that you had something that went for 30 miles, it was somewhere off in the boonies.
Gotcha.
Now, could you technically make a 30-mile corridor? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or would you just have to look for problem areas?
That is a great question. I'm not sure.
The 30 feet thing, is that property line or structure?
Did he use it? Did he use that term kind of repeatedly? The 30
Yeah.
feet.
Yeah, you did.
There's really no set standard for that.
Yeah, because he was talking about off the freeway, and that's different if you're dealing with easement versus because we have an easement going into our station, and the property owner, it's from the road to their house, they take care of, and then from our property where our gate is, where it starts, we take care of
Right,
that.
but as far as I understand, easements you could be landlocked by other types of property or other properties,
Well,
and
and
you have an easement into it. Now,
I think what he was talking about in that aspect was the fact that CAL FIRE and county jurisdictional area, right,
is that
is that 30 feet
okay?
off of that road.
So would they be responsible for that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because he was talking about the freeway, right?
Mhm.
But then he was also talking about the roads going into those houses that could be problematic.
I think that 30 feet
Yeah,
like,
his-
is a
his
county
sketch.
ordinance
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
the structure.
His
and,
yellow
like,
outline, the far left side of that thing was along the freeway, and then it went in.
Yeah, and that's because what happens is those structures fall under an X. It basically, they came up with that 52X and all that other X stuff, so they didn't have to rewrite all the maps because we're not responsible for structures,
Right.
and so they are. and so that falls under their boundary.
Yeah, and that's where he said, okay, they have the first 100 feet, and then he wanted to graduate off of that,
Mm-hmm.
which totally makes sense because we do that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, there wasn't like really too much explanation as far as how to go about doing that. And I understand you would have to have cooperators, and you would also have to, like, it'd be useless if they didn't do their 100 feet, but then you did 300 feet around it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you run into that a lot, actually.
Well, that was Carbaker was like that too, because there's places the road into Carbaker. It's a community kind of south of here.
Uh-huh.
It bisects national forest land, and then it'll be the road will go through private property, and then it's forest land. And when
Yeah.
we did the road, we only did the forest portions, and then kind of the landowners did their.
Yeah,
We
and
ended up granting, like,
Did
doing a
fire
lot of
safety
grant
council.
work through the Fire Safety Council. For
Well, I was going to speak to that, yeah, because you run into that constantly, and actually the Anderson fuel break that we're doing, it's a fuel break, but I also look at it as an evacuation corridor for some of those.
The
houses.
farther back is.
Yeah, like up the residents and things like that. So this is, the evacuation corridors, man, you guys are all hitting some of the concepts associated with that, like, especially with ordinances. And I'm trying to think of if there's any real there's no set concrete, so like the 30 feet, that's an arbitrary number. Unless it's like an ordinance. And I'm trying to think of if the California, what is it, the 4290 or whatever those, the state ones are associated, if they have any actual numbers that are associated with them.
I think that the generic one is 30 feet, because that's like the lowest number you'll ever hear. But San Diego County has a 100-foot ordinance.
For
Talk about-
evacuation routes?
Well, no,
for
for
For structures is 100 feet, but
Yes, 49, 40. Yeah, so let's talk about this. So like San Diego County has an actual MOU in place that addresses evacuation corridors and defensible space specifically. And it's this crazy thing that we're going to talk about during the NEPA part of it, I think, where it's NEPA technically, but it was signed in like 1995. And so for all NEPA, you have to have two things addressed, even for categorical exclusion, the lowest level NEPA. You have to have the Endangered Species Act, right, which is talking about threatened and endangered species.
watershed.
Nope, not water. No, watershed doesn't.
Or no,
apply.
it's the Clean Water Act, right?
Nope, the Clean Water Act is not one of the requirements either. That's just a checklist. It's the ESA and it's the. Do you know what the other one is? It's the.
something about the archaeological stuff.
Yeah,
the
it's
Historic
archaeological-
Preservation Act.
The American Historic Preservation Act. Of course, and you'll hear that referred to as Section 106. Section 106 of the Act refers to vegetation manipulation. So there's in NEPA, what we talk about as NEPA is actually three laws that you're looking at. You're looking at NEPA and all the provisions of NEPA, which is looking at the impacts, and it's ESA and it's SHPO. So it's the Section 106. The point is that no matter what you do on federal land for federal actions, you have to have those two things addressed. So even in the lowest level of NEPA, which is basically a checklist, you also have to address those two things. So this MOU that exists in San Diego County has basically a provision that says you can do what you want, but if you see an arc site, you got to let an archaeologist know. So that takes care of the Section 106. And then for the ESA, it has some provisions where you can do whatever you want. But if there's vernal pools, we'll talk about these vernal pools, which are these like small little wetland areas that are isolated. And then there's a couple other things. And then what it allows by default is 100 foot from structures, like you're saying, and it just where anybody in the county can do 100 foot and then 30 foot evacuation routes. So take it back to the evacuation route, that's the minimum. And I think to answer your question, there's really no set sort of definition or way of going about that. I think it's just like any fuels management treatment. You need to analyze it, hopefully with like models and look at the fuels and to determine your desired end state. And evacuation routes are really tricky. You know, I haven't dealt with them a ton, and I don't think many people think about them a lot, but super important. And I think it's one of those things that needs more attention. Because where do people die in wildland fires a lot?
exactly.
Yeah, in their cars trying to get out of there. So I don't think it gets nearly enough attention. And then to speak to the other point, which is that we don't own all the lands, like we want to do these actions, that's where it becomes extremely important to do these collaborative actions. Because how many times have you been like Carbaker, you got like a square section which like butts up right to a road, so we can go, but then all of a sudden we hit this like corner that's owned by
Yeah.
the private, and you have to skip it. So that's what we did in Carmaker. I gave them something like $500,000 or something like that 5 or 6 years ago to actually write a full NEPA document, and they are then able to go in and they're treating on the private land through the fire safety councils. And that's the way the remember we talked about the National Cohesive Strategy, which is this overarching sort of principled idea of how we should be going about fire and fuels management in America. All it comes down to is we need to work together and use the regulations that we have to stop doing these projects where the Forest Service and other agencies just work along our boundary lines. And actually the Anderson project that we have, which is the Alpine Community Defense Project, it's a great example of us trying to do that actively. So we have the same thing where we have these fuel breaks, and it literally there's just squares out of the middle that were private land. Well, what we decided to do instead of just ignoring it like we normally do and creating these disconnected lines, is that we actually got buy-off from our line officers to allow our specialists to go in there and analyze those areas under NEPA, and we leveraged our relationship with the Fire Safe Council to have them communicate with the public, because does the public like to talk to the person with the badge on? No, they really don't, not generally, unless your house is, unless it's on fire. So we use them as a conduit to talk with those folks and get the permission, and it actually worked awesome because we're working on our side of the fence, and now the Fire Safe Council, I gave them like $100,000 to do the work on their side of the fence, and we're all doing it with the same contractor at the same time, like right now.
Same standard.
Yeah, with the same standard, the same everything, so fundamentally it doesn't look different. And the other cool thing about that is the property boundary for the Forest Service goes up like 500 feet or so up on VA House Mountain. And so normally what would we do in the past? We would do a fuel break mid-slope along our property boundary. Have you guys seen that?
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I'm speaking to when I was looked at that Miramar Fire Management Plan. Remember those fuel breaks are set back away from the houses?
Yeah.
And I think you're looking at how to address this. But I talked with Rick and those guys early in the planning, and this is the important of project planning. You got to get out there with the specialists, you got to get out there with the fire people and the fire safety councils. You have to say it doesn't make sense for us to be up on the hill. What we need to do is we need to be on our boundary where it makes sense, and then we need to just bite the bullet and go along the property boundary through the fire safety councils, and that's what they did. They went and talked to those people and said, hey, do you mind if we'll pay for all of it if you let us do the NEPA and you let us do the cutting behind it. Because that makes way more sense to put the fuel break right behind the house. And so that's a complete success story. And you guys can do the same thing, in other districts. And I know you guys have a relationship with the Scripps Fire Safety Council.
So, I have a question.
Okay, I'm done with my part.
On that Anderson thing, how are we mitigating the vegetation that we cut on private property? Is the contractor exporting it out to the forest, or the property owner is going to do some sort of...
Yeah, because I thought that it takes jobs away, and that's why you're not...
It takes jobs away.
If you're cutting on private land versus on forest land, like doing treatments.
I don't know if that's a real thing. There's no provisions or law or regulations that I'm familiar with that states that. What we've done in some areas is that we've actually partnered with CAL FIRE. So Eric just started being a forester here in San Diego County. We brought him into it, and I don't actually know for sure. I think our NEPA analysis was that the material would be removed on Anderson. But I think we also talked to them about the ability that we'll pilot. The one thing that we can't really do, well, we could, but we can't go and burn on private land. It's way more complicated. But who can?
Cal Fire can.
Fire can. So we can give the money to the Fire Safety Council to cut it, and they can come in and burn the piles. And that's the best way to go. And we're doing that also on the South Main Divide, this Medgec project. There's some pieces along the South Main Divide where there's some private in the middle, and we've talked with the CAL FIRE. I think they're already working on it. In fact, I think their piece is already done. So, we don't oftentimes like to work with our partners, but it really, I'm finding it's the best way to go. It's hard. It's not easy to work with other people and get them, it gets back to that influence factor, But it tends to be the best thing to create the best product. Everyone following? So, if there's anything that I stress with you moving forward, it's the notion of working collaboratively with partners is people don't really like to do it, agency folks, because it's just hard. Cyrus.
But it's also easier if the other agencies that you're working with, because they each individually get along with you, but they don't get along with each other.
Hey, Cyrus, what's up?
Well, also,
You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
now they're butting heads, so
we use CAL FIRE a lot, like the crew.
No, we're at the
Or
at the
even,
in the building.
DOD's engines a lot, and it's okay.
Yeah.
We get along with them
Yeah.
fine. But like with CAL FIRE, it's more at the overhead level. They don't.
Yeah,
yeah, because they sit there and they feel that they're,
Yeah.
you know, and we run into that a little bit with CAL FIRE, but I think it's more of, you know, like, I don't know, I was looking at my final project, and the problem is that you had the Fire Safe Council, you had CAL FIRE, you had Idlewild Fire, and you had us,
Oh,
and then on top of that, you had the homeowners, because they had to approve it, and based on their contract set up or whatever with the Fire Council, is the homeowner's responsible for 25% of whatever is done to help their property, and you know, and so, you know, the hardest thing that you would think of would be to get the buy-in of the homeowner, right? But the problem is that Riverside County goes, all this land is ours, and Idlewild Fire goes, no, this land is
Right,
ours,
yeah.
and now you're in a whole nother realm of headbutting, and that's still like a huge topic. Like they don't, you know, because if Riverside County gives that up, you know, MDU or whatever, if they give that up, what happens is, or I'm sorry, RU, but if they give that up, now that's money that they're losing out on. You know what I mean?
Well, it allows Idlewild to contest them in the future, saying, hey, they said in this document that they're not responsible for it.
Yeah. So, you know, so, but I now I'm putting myself in the middle of a political battle. You know, so it's like now I would be stuck in the middle of a political battle to where, you know, you're trying to get your project done and the buy-in of the other resources. That's why it's good in theory, and it's good where you can pull it, but unless you have that higher, like you and I would probably not be able to get.
Right.
It would have to be like, you know, Chief 1 coming in and going, okay, look, this is what we're looking at. And, you know, how often does that ever happen?
Well, it also prolongs the process.
You're looking at like a 2-year, you know, to try to get something like that where they actually, because now I write a contract, and yeah, CAL FIRE agrees to it, but now Idlewild Fire says no, and so they want a stipulation, and so you put the stipulation in, and CAL FIRE has to review it, and now they're going, no, I don't want that, and, you know, and it's like.
Times.
So,
I got that taper here.
Yeah, it's a nice one.
Yeah. Found it outside by my pool.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Right on.
and this guy's whole backyard is pimp, but it's like all concrete now too. Concrete and water.
It's nice.
It is nice though.
Takes a lot of money.
It looks nice. I would know. Vern's never invited me over, you know, to like check out his pool. So, I just have to secretly stalk him on Instagram. Oh, did I see that up?
It's not creepy at all.
See right there.
That's the other thing too. Looking into all that stuff like you're talking about is that you know, you hear, you know, like know your enemy,
Yeah.
and I don't think it always entails with, you know, with fuels and all that. I think it entails a lot with material in order to back the cause in your cases, or, you know, because you'll have somebody say, well, we can't do that because of this. You know, like the 30 feet versus 100 feet, right? Well, where does it say it? No one can tell you. Well, where do I find it? No one can tell you. You know what I mean? That's just the way it's always been done. And it's like,
The enemy's probably not the best word either. It's really more like you know your challenge.
yeah.
But I think
But you know what I'm saying? Though, is like you just sit there and it's like no one can tell you where to find the information in order to find it out.
Shit, that's
You know, now it's like taking a month and a half to, you know, so.
comes from challenges. If, say, Will, board supervisor, he's pretty vocal on his opinion on whether wildland urban interface is the best option.
Yeah.
Project dollars.
Yeah, you guys all heard that.
But he's also willing to, or understanding that it's also an effect. What if he was a little more staunch on his standpoint there?
You mean, what do you mean, like,
Where he was more, he's vocal enough where he doesn't think it's the right thing to do, but he's also understanding enough whether he knows it's,
you mean, what if he actually got serious and said, hey, we're not doing this anymore?
yeah,
What's the question? Like, what would be the effect of that, or what would
Yeah.
be that? I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think you'd have a lot of pissed off people,
I would think so
that depend
too.
on us for their protection because they're not getting it from, Would that set you up for lawsuit though? Like if you had a wildfire go through, that they would sit there and try to blame you for not creating a clearance around their community?
I don't know that it
Even
would.
though
I mean,
it's
how
for
could
sale?
it? I don't know. How do you make it small? Yeah.
You have enough for
Give it a try.
move it further away.
Because if it's Forest Service land, they could try to blame it on
I
it.
thought you had to bring it closer. No, I don't think we're. That's the thing. I think the way to look at the land management plan on the
It should
back
be that
is
front one
something
up
that
there.
we can do.
the
I don't
focus
think
ring.
it's ever been identified as something that we have to.
Yeah.
That's just open.
No, not that one.
That's
You know what I mean?
focus.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
The
you
one-
can't be super
This
not
one is,
actually,
but
because technically
it just
you
turns
can
it
do
left and right.
everything.
Yeah, I just laugh because it's like
That's
Bonita
weird.
Vista was a good example where
Yeah.
we put in that huge project and it took
Yeah.
us forever to burn, and then we got down into this one drainage and they were like the Kino butterfly. You can't cut there, and then they finally said, well, you can, but it can only be 50 feet wide. And then when the mountain fire
Oh,
came in,
yeah.
it flew right through.
And
That's
it's-
that's
yeah.
where he jumped it.
Yeah.
Was right in that drainage.
Oops.
The same thing. You can find that example. Because, the same thing happened on the Cedar Fire with the Tragedy Springs burns. Aren't you guys have been around for that?
That's it.
They did these big burns, great, and they pivoted the Cedar Fire a lot
Oh,
of
is
areas.
that power cord?
But where it squirted through, and I
Yeah,
remember
one of
that
these benches
conversation
a bit
where it was
closer.
through the
Just
drainage
bring
that
the
they were not allowed to burn.
Screen
Well,
cleaner.
yeah.
Yeah.
Start bringing the
And so
screen
the
on.
other thing with that too is the fact that they were like, oh, the Kino butterfly and all this other stuff. But then when the fire pushed through, we actually got more.
Remove the screen.
Yeah, we're-
When we turned around with the Kino butterfly, the regrowth, they were actually getting population growth.
Yeah. They were getting more Kino. Yeah, we've had the same thing in our field breaks.
You know?
But yeah, we actually they
Because
found
now-
more Kino.
Yeah, because now the regrowth is lower to the ground. It's easier for them to get to, and they were finding an increase in numbers.
Oh, we gotta move this.
But it's like they had this stuff that and it's like, so you run into that whole thing.
But the problem that I've realized several times is that as being part of an administrative agency,
Yeah.
people, there's so many interests being pumped into one area of land, you can't make everybody happy. And a lot of times, okay, we gotta do this, we can't do that. And then mistakes do happen where it's like, a lot of times where you have kill breaks, but, oh, you're not allowed to cut here, and it ends up jumping that anyways. You can't make everybody happy, but what you
No.
can do is follow your guidelines.
See, and the thing that's interesting about that though is that I wonder if we did like the cut like she had asked, and if she had given us approval to thin, so we still have stuff there, but we thin it, and so you're going to have regrowth that comes up, but it's a little bit more sparse, so it's not hitting that weak section in the line as hard,
Well, maybe she
Whether
should
it-
let you do it now.
whether
Well, you gotta capture those lessons learned, all right? Like,
yeah.
You gotta take her out or he or whoever afterwards and say, hey, this is what happened. Because a lot of times they just don't know, right? And you
Mhm.
can't blame them for not knowing because they're not fire people.
Well, again, it's sort of seeing that the 10 acres you saved ended up losing 5,000 acres as a result of.
And being burned anyway.
Yeah,
And it kind of goes
Yeah.
back to what Thad was saying about, being hesitant about following a project plan that's put together solely by knowledge.
Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a huge takeaway too. Is that as you guys advance in your careers, and maybe you're in a position now, but you have to be involved with those because those people, it's their job to create these project plans. the lecture that I give when I do project planning is I talk about, like, one of the things that struck me when I started working for the federal agency was, like, projects is what we do. Like, all we do is projects. It's kind of this weird, like, we're so used to it, it's hard to take a step back and realize, like, our whole life is revolving around projects, right? Think about if we didn't have projects to do, like, what would we do besides fire? Like, ignore the whole firefighting aspect of it. What would anybody that's employed by the agency do with their time?
I'd be stuck doing what I'm doing.
Besides that,
Oh, that hazmat.
Yeah, do you see what I'm saying though? It's all about projects. And so, like, planning, so that's their world, is planning projects and implementing projects, but primarily planning projects. And so as we get involved with those and are tasked with implementing them, obviously we need to be involved with the planning side. And that could be anybody, especially if you're the one at the end of it. At the one end of it, I mean, like, implementing it. So, and it might be as simple as, like, when you're out there burning and these things aren't working, you know, keep pushing back. Engage with those people. That's probably the reason why you're in this class, is to have enough of that terminology and knowledge to, you know, when the biologist, you know, is out there, you ask them those questions, because I've heard a lot of good questions around the forest with those people when they actually come out. And me personally, and you should ask your chiefs, get those people out on the ground. I know Megan was out a lot when Megan Jennings used to work here. You guys had plenty of discussions with her, right?
Kill you.
Yeah, I mean,
Don't touch it, or I'll kill you.
exactly. But that's a high level of engagement, and you understood where she came from anyway. And I think there was conciliations made. And I know you're dealing with that, right? So how's it work on Miramar working those folks?
I don't know, because half of them say do whatever you want, and the other half are like, no, no, no.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Is that frustrating?
Yeah.
Or, I don't know, it's
And
always
they- yeah, they-
frustrated me that the no people, it's the exclusion seems to be the easy way out of all of that.
I was talking to somebody about that, right?
Me.
What were we talking about? Art?
So there's some ARC sites that have been found in one of our projects, and it's part of one of our burning projects. But pretty much, he was talking about, I guess, the easy way for them to be, okay, no, just stay out of there. But I guess one way you can challenge them is, okay, well, we're gonna stay out of there. Then, it needs to be flagged, and we can't do the flagging. And then when you put the ball on their court, a lot of times it's a matter of them not wanting to go out there. They just don't have the time, and you'll have more leniency, if you will, by challenging them to get out there.
Well, that too, and a lot of the ARC site stuff, they don't want to mark. They don't want people to know where it is.
Mm-hmm.
So you're fighting that battle too.
Well, then you tell them, well, then if you're not going to market, we're not going to know what it is. It's a two-way street.
Yeah.
I mean, even if
Can't
it means
avoid nothing.
So like all that ARC GIS stuff is all super secret.
Well, and that's a legal requirement, so that's fine. But when it comes down to, like, we're actually going to implement this next week, you got to let us know where these sites are. And even if that means you're coming out when we're burning, whatever, you got to put that onus back on them. So that is one way to push back on them, and not in a negative way, but in a, hey, how serious are you about us avoiding this? Because sometimes when you push them, is what we're saying. Sometimes when you really push them, it turns out it's actually not that big of a deal.
Archaeology is kind of a different one, because that stuff literally, if you disturb it, it literally could go away.
Yeah.
But some of the exclusion, like ecological exclusion stuff, like the Horkelia, or that's the only example I know, or the spiny red berry we have too stuff, it turns out that it wants to get messed with in some way or another, and if you don't mess with it, it doesn't get any better.
Yeah.
Well, Megan came out and she was explaining to us she wanted a certain amount of snacks left per acre. And we're like, the guys dragging the torch are like, what the hell? Why? And she was explaining, okay, well, it's habitat for woodpeckers, it's habitat for different animals. It's like, oh, okay. And then, yet, it made those guys kind of go back on their tactics, like, okay, we'll start ringing them.
Yeah.
And when you have somebody that's like hands-on and will actually like explain stuff to you, it puts everything into perspective so that you're not just, just don't do it. And people are like, well, screw you.
It's like when your parents say you have to do something.
Exactly.
Some of that, if you get some buy-in with it, but like the Laguna Skipper is hard to buy, because I've never met anybody that's seen one.
Yeah, I know. That's
See
an
what
interesting
Palmer.
one.
Yeah.
But we've made a lot of progress with Horkelia. It's actually the Horkelia. So Horkelia is a plant that lives up here, and there's this butterfly that uses it as a host species, but the butterfly hasn't been seen here in about 30 years. And the other thing too is that there's a presumption that perhaps burning it actually, the reason that you're not seeing the butterflies is because the grass has grown up around the orchidea and the butterflies are not able to get there. Overwintering pods or whatever the hell they call it underneath the plant, they just physically can't get to it, so burning the grass out. So you guys have pushed back, and in the newest NEPA we can actually burn some of those areas, and we're monitoring it, which is what we're talking about today. And now we can actually burn some of those areas experimentally, and so I suspect that in time we'll actually it's not going to be a problem anymore. It would have been the same thing had the fire people and the implementers not pushed back on it and really asked and said, hey, see, look, you know, our fuels tech's out monitoring it, like literally putting in line plots and demonstrating that it's actually a positive result.
Well, and, you know, the initial stuff and the photo plots from that are pretty impressive
Yes,
as far as it working.
I should send that to you guys. That's some of the stuff I should hand out.
I guess the biggest takeaway for me when it comes to working with the specialist is, you know, I guess we tend to fear what we don't know. But like up until yesterday, you know, I figured, you know, an arc site was like a indefinite LOP, something you're gonna avoid at all costs for forever, you know. And yesterday I had a discussion with Regina. She's the archaeologist on our forest, and we brought up the fact like, well, could there be fire on there? Because one of our chiefs, Fogel, brought up the question, you know, does fire need to be excluded as well as mastication? And I'm thinking to myself, well, of course, you know, it's like, if we can't masticate, why are we going to burn around it? And go figure, you know, some archaeologists actually encourage fire on these arc sites so that they don't get buried and you can still retain their value. Because if they're buried and never found again, then, you know, what's the point of even, you know, having that site? But so what came of that was we're gonna go Thursday to go check out if we're either gonna burn them or leave them or just cut line around them or whatever the case is. And with that too, the whole legal aspect of not being able to put maps out there, she was saying we can have maps, but they have their own folder, and then they just want us to keep that stuff separate from like the field technician folder, the chief folder, because I don't know what the word she used, but it was pretty much like an audit where they can come and take all your documents. But the archaeologists, they're protected to where they're not audited and they can't take their information. So if they take all our information for whatever reason, all our data, then that's how they want to preserve it and keep it from getting out to whoever.
Because a lot of that archaeological stuff's excluded from the Freedom of Information Act.
It's crazy. You only, things only 40 or 50 years old are considered an arc site.
50 years old.
50,
Yeah, because we found an old car dumped in the woods, and they're like, "That's an arc site." And I was like, "Really? It's just an old car from the 60s."
I
But
talked to an archaeologist on the last fire, and they're working on a hardline date, like make it 1965 and older is archaeological, and getting rid of the 50-year thing.
Oh, really?
Because they were talking about, you know, I asked them about it, and they said it's a discussion, because technically, pretty soon, landfills are going to be archaeological sites.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And you're going to be digging up, you know, old computers and things that are, they're trying to find a date that makes it where there wasn't a ton of documentation about what was the items you'd find, versus now we've been documenting things pretty well since some specific, you know, point in time where, you know, you don't necessarily need to dig up an old IBM computer because there's archives of everything about it and examples of it exist.
Right, yeah, there's tons of contemporary books and knowledge and document. Yeah, something that's probably got a Wikipedia posting about it or something. Or, yeah, I got you, it's a good point.
We've actually helped out the archaeologists on a couple of our fuels projects up here. A couple of years ago, we were cutting all the snags off of the highway.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of different areas they didn't want us to proceed unless there's an archaeologist there. So then the archaeologist came out, and we actually ended up showing them more sites than they actually had on the map.
Oh, wow.
So they were able to document that. And we were also it kind of developed the relationship beyond like, well, I'm from the office and you're from the field kind of idea to, okay, hey, if you guys find anything, here's my card, let us know. And then also Nate
Smith, yeah.
he's come out a couple times. We've kind of shared some ideas and shared some information, and he's one of those guys that we want to get out on these projects.
Yeah, he's super gung ho, and he's actually a fuels arc that we have for the next 2 years on the forest here.
Isn't there, I don't know, I heard some rumor about the resurveying things accidentally and finding stuff that's not, resurveying's not supposed to happen.
I hadn't heard that.
Oh.
Not supposed to happen?
Well, in the NEPA, in the archaeological things, is from what I understood, is you're only supposed to account for known sites,
Oh, really?
and going out and resurveying and finding new sites is sort of detrimental to the program.
Well, yeah, because you can't, at some point you just have to call them good and you I'll have to ask him about that. I mean, that's just sort of like a known thing, but our current archaeologist is taking a little different tack on that, so.
But would you be able to, so if you found multiple sites, whatever, could you just put like, obviously if we're doing burning, we just have to mitigate for that on the NEPA, or using the NEPA, but
Yeah.
could you add an amendment to the NEPA?
If you needed to, yeah. Sure, you can always add an amendment or a supplemental information report, which is primarily the way to go.
That one over here, like Kitchen Creek, where fire was allowed into this site, but we couldn't cut, and we couldn't like actively introduce fire into the site, but if it ended up in it, it wasn't a huge deal.
Well, you gotta remember that, we talked about this in 310, right? Remember, fire is actually one of the things that's the least damaging to some archaeological sites. Obviously not, I always give the example of, standing teepees from an old village site. But, those things have been around for thousands and thousands of years, so they've seen fires. So fire is not going to hurt them. It's that disking or running a masticator over the top of it or running equipment that's going to cause a physical damage to it. So it depends on the resource, though.
It's helped us out though, getting them out and talking. Okay, what's your end state versus what's my end state, and then we'll come to a compromise and be like, okay, well, hey, can you do me a favor and just use your chainsaws to go around this area, or cut out some of those logs, roll them off so it doesn't scar any of the rocks,
Right.
that kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, so that you kind of get an understanding of both worlds.
And it makes you a better land manager. That's why we're here. We're here to manage the land, right? That's literally what we're doing. So, and I've found, and it's not always the case, I'm sure we have horror stories, but almost always they're just happy when you show a level of engagement. They're almost always willing to back down maybe from their position if they had a strong position. And when they don't, you should pay attention because it might be really important, or it might be a law or regulation or something that actually has to be followed. It doesn't go both ways.
I ran into that. I just got back from that Thomas fire as a heavy equipment boss,
Oh, yeah, okay.
and the Los Padres is pretty rich with cultural resource
Yeah.
stuff. And there was this one spot in particular that was, it was already been repaired by the time I got there, and they said stay out of it. And then an archaeologist showed up, and guns blazing about the damage that had occurred and all this. Wanted a month's worth of work done, and we spent an hour walking around in there and came up with a plan to do a half a day's worth of work to mitigate the problems. So that work, just working with them, because there was some heavy equipment bosses there that would have shot back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And then you wouldn't have gotten anywhere.
Right.
And it would have been there for a month.
Exactly. And it ended up being the day we worked on it, there was 7 resource advisors in 200 feet of fire line.
No shit.
Like, it was borderline insane, but it was what we had to do to make everybody happy.
That's a perfect example of, again, they leveraging the stuff that hopefully this class and these conversations will have you in the future as you don't all have to be fuels techs. It's going out on heavy equipment boss assignments. It gives you that understanding. Maybe you had it before, maybe you didn't, but, this is what we have to do to understand.
It's one of those, in that case, it was a lot of discussion, because what they wanted done would actually have been more detrimental to the site than what existed.
You had to point that out to them?
Oh yeah.
Really?
Well,
Because they didn't understand the equipment, you mean?
Well, there was a dozer line coming down this ridge, and there was a bench with an arc site, and there was water bars that diverted water into the arc site.
Oh.
But it diverted water into stable ground with vegetation on it still. And they
Okay.
wanted to get rid of all the water bars to keep water out of the arc site, which I had to point out that it would have undermined the arc site even more. And, it ended up being, there was an archaeologist, a cultural advisor, a hydrologist, a biologist, the head reed for the fire. There were 7 people out there watching an excavator work for 4 hours.
Who was the lead read?
Martin Hutton. He's from the Tongass in Alaska.
Not much going on there in January.
Sounds like there's not much going on there ever.
Not much of a fire.
But it was interesting to watch. And then you got one guy like, hey, can you move like that one rock 6 inches to the left kind of thing? Which, it got a little ridiculous, and you had to be there, there to curb some of their, like, is it really that big of a deal if that rock moves 6 inches?
Resource advisors are an interesting group to work with. I actually really enjoy it most of the time, even when it's a pain. We don't really talk much about it in this class, except for conversations like this, but we certainly talk about it in the 310 class, and you guys that haven't been there yet. It's probably about the only place you're ever going to get exposed to it, other than just practice.
Oh yeah, sometimes they want some.
You guys ready to get started on this?
Sure.
You guys need a break or anything, just grab it. What time is it? Holy smokes, that's already alright. That's alright, whatever. We'll get through it. It's all good,
It's
right?
good discussion.
I told you before, I'd rather have these discussions than anything. But in the absence of that, you guys want to do a little bit of lecturing here? You guys good with it?
Yeah.
Alright. Is that fuzzy? Pretty good?
It's good.
Alright, let's go ahead and at least talk about this stuff a little bit. We'll get going for the day, otherwise we'll just be jabbering. But so I do have some objectives for this where I'm going to try to sell to you guys why data monitoring and data collection is important. You guys, actually no, I'm getting ahead of myself. We're going to talk about some common data collection methodologies, some stuff that you are liable to maybe be asked to do, or some stuff that you may find yourself in a position to want to implement for whatever reason, locally or if you're developing a plan or whatever. We're going to talk about just a few of the tools. There's a lot more that you could. This class, you could spend a whole fuels curriculum just on monitoring, like many of these topics. So we'll just kind of do the high paths. Do you guys remember yesterday Dan showed you the NEPA triangle? Okay. So do you remember where monitoring was on the NEPA triangle? Yeah, it's actually it's on the bottom of it. So yesterday Dan talked about the left side. It's called the left side, project design. So that's always where you start with. It's always where you start with NEPA. And then you talk about consistency, what you're going to do possibly for activities, desired condition. It's basically just trying to understand the area and then looking at what your laws and regulations are. But the monitoring is actually a full part of the triangle, and it's the bottom part. And I think the fact that it's on the bottom as the base is pretty appropriate, actually, because a lot of this left side stuff and then the right side stuff when you're actually doing the NEPA relies upon actually understanding what's out there on the ground. Because otherwise, how could you possibly make a plan and then implement it and know what you're doing? And there's some aspects to go into feedback, adjustment. This is sort of this adaptive management process where if you're actually doing an active adaptive management in your NEPA, in your project implementation, it simply means where you give yourself flexibility in the NEPA, where you can start implementing something, and if it's not working out, you can monitor it. It always requires monitoring, and then you can make adjustments. Like maybe the piles that are 10 feet need to be 5 feet, or maybe they can be 15 feet, that sort of level of changes. And then you evaluate and monitor it. But it's super important to do monitoring. Why? There's different reasons why you might want to do monitoring. A lot of times it is an actual requirement in the land management plans or land management plans that you have. Sometimes it's a requirement in the NEPA documents. Although you don't see that as much because, you know, NEPA is sort of like, I don't know, it's like a law, it's not like a law, but it's something you have to do by law. When you sign a NEPA decision, whatever you put into it, you are bound by law to do. So if you bind yourself in the NEPA to do monitoring, you have to do it. And we've gotten in trouble, the Forest Service and other agencies have gotten in trouble where they've said that we're going to do this monitoring and then they have it, and then they've been challenged, especially in later projects, where they say the same thing, where they say we're going to do monitoring, and then an environmentalist group says, well, you said you were going to do monitoring on this last project and you didn't, and they're kind of like, you know, what do you do at that point? So a lot of times what they'll do is they'll just leave the monitoring out of it, which isn't the right thing to do either. So, you guys know what I mean by it fills the need for seasonality related data? We talked about seasonality, so any idea what that might refer to?
Well, I mean, seasonality, so basically like it would fall into certain plant blooms at this time, or butterflies are introduced into this area at this time, and so you're stuck in that window where you can't touch that area.
Yes, yeah, no, that's part of it for sure, is there's certain times where you have to monitor it because, like, especially with the botanists, they go out there in the spring, and that's like their heyday, or their busy season, because all the little plants and stuff, especially the smaller stuff that can be identified, that's when it's blooming, and some of that stuff's not available in winter. And then what about, like, from a project level?
Well, if you're
related to seasonality.
just, if you do all your behave stuff and get your desired fire conditions on for your prescription in there, and you know what fuel moistures and things going to take. If you monitor, let's say, fuel moistures throughout the year, you'll know about what time of year they're going to be right where you can gear up to start implementing your project.
Yep, that's
for pre-monitoring.
That's exactly right. That's the other part of it. Is especially, and fuel moistures is especially the thing where this comes into it. And fuel moisture data collection, which probably a lot of you guys actually participated in it, at least seen it. That's monitoring. You're monitoring your fuel load, and exactly that's why you tie into knowing when you're in prescription. And then that same thing is the next part. It allows you to make better prescriptions. So it's like you might make a prescription for a certain fuel moisture and want to do that, but it might, if you're not looking at the seasonality data, you're never going to be in prescription. So understanding what's going on out there from a moisture, environmental, and a physiological plant condition will help you make those better prescriptions so you can actually do it right. And then allows you to continue doing what's doing correct. So if you go out there and do a project and it works out, you seem like the fire effects or whatever effects you're doing 5 years later seem really good. Well, if you've been monitoring that the whole time, the next project that you want to do, you're able to, support your position and say it worked out well. And then by the same token, if someone says, well, that project didn't work, well, you can prove that it did. How else? And this is really the fundamental reason why I want to talk about monitoring so much, is that for so long, we have not really been able to pass that red face test. We haven't really been able to say what we did was working. Even to this day on this forest, we're not doing a great job. We're doing a much better job. We're not doing a great job of actually being able to say, after we walk away from a burn, especially a burn, whether that burn met the objectives or not. And so that's the goal, actually, where I'd like to go out and take that pre-data and then the post-data. Because what are some of the...
Is that on the burn boss to go back and monitor whoever's in charge of that burn, or how does that work?
That's a good question. I would say for the burn boss, so element, I think it's 21 of the burn plan is the monitoring. And so at the very least, the burn boss has to make sure that the monitoring plan in the burn plan is being followed. A lot of times there isn't one, okay, so then they don't have to do anything technically. But if there is a monitoring plan in it, they need to make sure that that gets followed because they're in charge of that day. I would say the fuels officer or the project manager is probably more liable to be following that project. So most fuels projects is your fuels AFMO or whatever, the fuels tech or whatever. I would say as a burn boss, what I would urge you to do is please use fire effects monitors. Yeah, because FEMOs are dedicated to collecting that data. And unless you as a burn boss want to do those fire effects or the weather data sheets, and which most of the time you don't have time to do, I would definitely urge you to start collecting that data. And it's something that we do here on the force. We had a O drive folder, which I think I have a link to here. We need to set up a new folder for it with the opinion system that we have now. And we have data going back to maybe 2013, 14 when we really started taking it across the district. So, did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of across the board, but definitely as a burn boss, collect that data. And you've been doing it for your Type 3 burns, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was pretty impressed to see that folder, think of it. And I don't know, do you know how the San Jac district is monitoring your burns at all?
Mm-hmm. Over the years, I've never really seen any like before and after until like last year. We were doing
Yeah, we're
strawberry.
utilizing FEMO's, it's been all in the burn boss packet.
Mm-hmm.
You
But-
know, a one-sheet summary type stuff.
Yeah.
But last year was kind of nice, like in strawberry with Art, he was take a picture before and then a picture after, and that way you have some sort of thing to actually visually kind of relate to.
Yeah, photo plots, they're very powerful. They don't have a lot of data, but just from a visual standpoint. Yeah. And then,
1,000 words.
what's that?
We have 1,000 words.
It is worth it. Do you guys know what you're doing for any monitoring on Miramar? Do you know?
We just basically burn boss assign somebody to do it.
Is that a regular part of it? When you go burn, actually someone's doing it?
Yeah, it's usually the burn boss or one of the just extra people hanging out doing it.
Is that usually only written in on broadcasts and pile burning, not so much monitoring done, or is it pretty much any project?
It could
We
be any
have it.
project, yeah.
Okay.
But if it's a new project, then yeah, we'll go out, take pre and post pictures, and the environmental usually wants to see it.
Are they the ones doing it, or are they asking the fire folks to do it?
They're asking us to do it.
Do you have standards? Or is it just take a picture?
Oh, Paul had kind of his own little system.
Yeah.
We're trying to go to the standard.
Yeah.
So we're in limbo.
It's okay. I know you guys are evolving. I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
Also on the San Jac, we I don't like the term, but they're called daily diaries. It's pretty much a sheet, and you kind of take like a AAR approach. We'll plan what happened.
Yeah.
Basically documenting everything, especially like conversations with our cooperators, like on the CAL FIRE agreements and stuff like that. I know that goes into the folder where all the pictures. Pretty much each project has its own little folder.
Do you guys have standard fire effects monitor organizers? FEMA organizers?
I don't even think we have a FEMA in our district, right?
You don't need to necessarily be a FEMA, but it's like a little packet.
I heard about that on the RX-310 class, but
Yeah, I
I've
think
never
we brought
seen
some
one.
in,
It'd be
yeah.
nice to. I think what was his name? The field tech, not Kyle. Cole. Yeah. I think he was supposed to.
I think I got it posted up on the community page, but make sure we get those to you.
What was it interesting, thinking of it as monitoring now, is, I don't know if it came from you or whatever, but the fuel shop on our district is taking the daily PAL levels and averaging them out. So when they do contracts stuff, they can say, the month of August has a 5-year average of 10 E with the variance days.
Yes.
And, I just now thought of that as a sort of a monitoring for, not prescription, but for, project fulfillment things.
Well, the number of days you'd actually be able to work.
Yeah, to help
Yeah.
estimate project lengths and.
Yeah. That's part of the fire management plan in the contracts, and that's actually something, it's existed for a while, but when Andrew Weinhardt, our new forester, it was awesome. He's come in and added a breath of fresh air to a lot of things like contracting and stuff. So I kind of lost my hand. I had done a lot of contracting before I came here, and then I just wasn't doing COR stuff, but he was active COR, and so he had sort of the new modern stuff, and that's one of the things that he added into it.
Yeah, but,
And it's been
it's
pretty cool.
kind of a, I don't know, Rick was doing it the other day and came down and, I don't know, we had some log or something that he needed a copy of for it, and I was asking about it. It seemed like a good idea as far as project planning, using monitoring. It's a different kind of monitoring, but.
No, that's easy monitoring to get to because that stuff's posted all. You can
Yeah.
go back and get to it electronically.
Reusing data that already exists to perform some sort of estimate of work and stuff. So we have to do that.
Yeah, and data is always good when it's easy to get to too, and you can get a lot of that data. But in other times, like the burn data, like that stuff's perishable. You got to take it while you're doing it. You know, it's hard to come back and think about it later. Hey, Chief.
Hey, good morning.
How are you?
Good, how you guys?
Smell like smoke?
Not yet.
Not yet. I heard you guys are burning down there. I was afraid you might come in and tap us and order us down there.
Well, it's nice to know we got a group up here if we need them.
Preserve.
Jack Bull Grady here.
Molly. If you guys don't know, this is Talbot Hayes, who's the division chief here in the Descanso district. Yeah.
Pretty small group.
Yeah, it's an intimate group. We got a few guys missing.
Yeah, a few.
Yeah, there's a few who's missing. Blansky and Welder's got a sick kid.
Oh my guys.
Well, you got more to spare since it's pretty Descanso heavy. Yep, we're just talking about monitoring, talking about FEMOs and the value of it.
Well, don't mind me. Continue on.
All right,
Stopping by.
I'm glad you did. So why don't we do it? This is always a good question because one of the things about monitoring is it doesn't get done a lot, either from burn monitoring or project monitoring or whatever. So these are some of the examples that I like to give for why it doesn't get done. And one of the first ones is it's difficult to do, especially because it's pseudoscientific, right? You have to, like for monitoring to be good, it's just like any scientific endeavor. You have to do it the same. You have to do it consistently. There can't be a lot of variation built into it. So it requires training, it requires standardized tools. So it's just hard to do. And a lot of times people just don't know how to do it.
Would that fall into the, so if you were doing monitoring, would you want the same person doing that plot? Like, so because that way you don't have any variance, they're doing it the same way that they did it.
Using like scientific method, anybody should be able to do it as long as the plot points are, as long as you're not using some made up, something you invented yourself, as long as the person that's replacing you knows the geographic or the spatial location of the points and the method you use to gather that data, anybody that's qualified to do it ought to be able to do it. Like photo plots, Jamie does, she'll put stakes in the ground and with like a, she knows where the stakes are and they're marked, and then she has for each point there's a degree cardinal direction on it to set up and take the photo at, and the beginning and ending points of transects are all marked out there. So as long as you know the process, anybody should be able to do it because it's for it to remain,
Kind of like
objective.
standardizing the process where the inputs aren't left open to interpretation. Because people
That's kind of what I was getting at.
So that's exactly right, and that's the answer. How do you go about making sure that what Richard just described is the case? Like how does everyone know how to do those? Training, and it has to be like written down, right? That's why you have those like in the monitoring plan, and NEPA a lot of times will have the process. Not always, but it should have a dedicated, so everything, there's different ways of doing monitoring, but if you're going to do a certain project like a plot, you should have a monitoring plan, and that monitoring plan shows you the process. So you're right, anybody can do it. Yeah, it should never be just like one person is the only person able to, because that really, yeah, you're right, it's not scientific otherwise.
And I think that's the pitfall that's happened a lot is monitoring, the guy that was monitoring it or the person gets a job on the Tahoe,
Yeah.
and then that monitoring project is sort of abandoned because it was sort of their pet project and it didn't, they sort of used their own.
Yeah, I was just getting to the
System.
point of interpretation, like, making sure, I guess, that there's
So,
no variance in interpretation.
It should be solid enough of a process that you're not subject to interpretation. There's always going to be differences. That's just human nature. But you should strive towards having a process that's so solid that there's not that much interpretation. And we're actually going to talk about some of that individual interpretation later, and that'll sort of daylight it. So I would say, like, if you really wanted to have it be super tight, then yeah, maybe send the same person out. But conceptually, it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't have to be that way for all the reasons we just talked about. And that's a good question, though. That question comes up a lot, actually.
Probably would benefit to assign like somebody in charge just for accountability and to stay organized, because it's like if we got a bunch of folks taking data, at the end of the day you want to make it accessible, and it's like you might have your folder over here, and it's like just have one centralized location.
Well, I think, yeah, so definitely centralized location. I do think it makes sense to have like maybe one person for at least the time that they're there overseeing it. So like a fuels tech. You know, you might have other people like fuels moisture. Like there's like I think like on your district is a good example. There's like 3 stations. Are they still doing it that way? There's like 3 different stations taking it, but one person collapses that data and makes sure it's all consistent. And if there's an error in one station, they catch it. That's a good way to insert that consistency as well too. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I like what you're saying. Yep. So another reason we don't do it a lot of times is it takes time to do it. And you know, it takes you away from another project, takes you away from burn piles or whatever. And you know, as fire professionals especially, we're geared towards implementation. We want to go get stuff done and then go to the bar afterwards. You know, go have a beer. We don't want to come back 3 days later or a month later or God forbid a year later or a project that we went to and go monitor it. I mean, some monitoring can be 5 years. How many times have you guys, just because you wanted to, gone back a month or a year later to a burn that you did just on your own accord? Maybe take the engine out of the station and say, hey, let's go look at unit 32 we burned a year ago. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I mean, is that something that's real regular? Just for going in and monitoring, or say, hey, I really want to go be part of the monitoring process? I'm not calling anybody out here, I'm just pointing out that, you know, we understand the reasons we don't. But could you learn a lot from doing something like that? Yeah, you definitely could pull those, and that's why it's important that you could pull the FEMO sheets. That's why we have that data at a central location. Pull those pictures, look at the pictures before we go out there and see what it looked like before. It's a way to gain knowledge too. The other question I like to ask you is how many times you guys ever been to a fire you were at 5 years ago and seen the effects? That hardly ever happens, right? We always go scratch line for 2 weeks, and almost never come back to the same thing and see what actually happened. Lack of interest, that certainly this is the case. It can be tedious and boring. Monitoring is like, a lot of people are like, yeah, I'm going to go monitoring, and then on like day 2, they're like, I'm over it, this sucks, putting plots out. I mean, I'm guilty of that. I'm like, I'm good for a day or 2, but after that, it gets pretty old. For my master's thesis, I think I told you, maybe I mentioned, I think I did like 1,600 plots. These plots where it was like a 6-foot diameter, and so you had a 3-foot stick, and you just go in a circle and do that 1,600 times. It got a little old by the end of the summer, you know. Same plant species, there's only like 6 different species, so it can get tedious, which also makes, you know, maybe makes you look to do shortcuts, which isn't good, so it's part of the reason people don't want to do it. But there's no value if you don't do it, and there's especially no value if it's not reported. Why it's like, people, there's a lot of data that exists, but it's just like in the biologist's laptop, right? Because they took that data, and then what happens? They go take a job somewhere else, and that data just disappears. Or it just sits in a folder, and then we move from the J drive to the O drive, and then we move from the O drive to the Pinion drive, and you know that stuff doesn't transfer through. You lose file structures. I mean, if you look through some of these there's old stuff out there. Or you know, we move from analog to digital. Isn't there? There's like a bunch of data sitting in file cabinets, right, down at Descanso or something. I've heard. Have we taken the time to digitize that? There's certainly value in it.
Well, yeah, I've seen them. There's like the old like handwritten spreadsheet books full of like fuel moisture data from the 60s.
Yeah, would that be cool to see from like a multi-decadal trends standpoint? Would that be kind of cool to see? Yeah, it certainly would. I bet there's some researchers that would love to see that sort of stuff. Yeah, and it's there, but it's not valuable if it's not reported and it's not seen by others. So, and the other thing is this thing. You guys ever heard of this term unfunded mandate? Did you know that the Forest Service in general receives $0 for planning? All our money that comes in from national fire and stuff, it's not planning dollars, it's implementation dollars. There is some money that's supposed to go to planning, but we technically are not really even funded for planning. There's no like planning code necessarily. It's just supposed to be done. And there's certainly no money for monitoring. So monitoring becomes this like secondary thing even to like planning. So it's what's called an unfunded mandate. It's something you're mandated to do, but they don't give you money to do it. It's kind of crazy, but it's a concept that you see in bureaucracies. And that's not going to be getting any better probably under our current administration. One USDA, baby. Have you seen that yet? Yeah. Be working with the Farm Service. So this is a, you guys can read this out. See if there's more coffee. See if you can read that. What does that say? Read it out loud.
Today, Brian.
Somebody in Stephen batted.
Ephraim. Today, Ephraim.
Ephraim and Stephen.
Battle.
Wild Road.
Battled entire slow
Entire slope of poison oak, it was very unpleasant.
wild rose flowers.
Yeah. Today, Ephraim Garcia and Stephen Ware battled entire slopes of wild rose, followed by entire slopes of poison oak. It was very unpleasant. I found this, so I sent out some folks to do data collection, and they did it for a matter of a month or so up on Palomar. And I was just doing the data processing, and I looked on the back of the sheets, and this was written. I'm like, this is a very passive-aggressive note that Stephen wrote. I called. I'm like, what is this? He's like, oh yeah, it sucked that day. This is part of the reason why people don't do it. I mean, it sucks. If you get poison oak, I mean, you got to put your plots right through poison oak sometimes, and walk around through wild rose. So it's just kind of fun. This is just, you know, it's a real thing. It can be difficult. What were you saying? What's Steven doing there?
Cal Fire.
What's that?
Cal Fire.
Is he getting Cal Fire?
Yeah. Working in the warehouse.
Is he for real?
Look what you did to him.
I know, I broke it. That's the real
fire delivering lunches this year.
Are you serious? Oh man. Alright, whatever. That's a hero. So question is, this is just pushing that point more, how much implementation work have you all done? Have you ever implemented a project? Raise your hand.
All of it.
Drifted, lit the torch? Yes.
Yeah,
That's all we've done, right? But how much monitoring? Have you guys ever actually gone out and said, today I'm monitoring something? You're helping the fuels tech, helping the biologist. I'm actually curious, like how many would say that you have spent a day monitoring?
Occasionally I get suckered into taking weather.
I don't know. That point, so I'm going to give you a half a point.
I'll take it.
Fuel samples? Let's say that counts. Let's say that counts a little bit. I give you half credit for that. Which, by the way, I forgot to, have I started distributing points yet in this class? No points yet?
Taking weather.
So I'm giving Cyrus 100 points towards completion of this class because he stopped and picked up the projector. Yes, no, Chief. I meant to mention that right away, so I appreciate you doing that. See, I was like, taking a shower this morning, I was like, oh, I didn't bring the damn projector. Started panicking. But I knew I had some reliable folks to count on, so 100 points to you. The rest of you guys are all still 0. I know, it's terrible.
Just give me half.
Oh, I gave him half a point, that's right. You get a point, half a point for your moisture.
Renee helped take
Almost there.
pictures during one of his burn while he was burn boss.
Did you? I'll give you 5 points for that. It's good work. You knew that.
Put on Facebook and didn't turn
We
it.
do fuel samples all the time.
Alright.
Twice
you
a
don't
month,
have
does that
one
get
way to
one
go home then.
2.5 points.
A couple points for that folder you showed me. So that's the point though, right? So we all do implementation, but we really don't do that much monitoring. No fault of our own necessarily. It's just that it doesn't come up as much. You can see those proportional differences. You raise your hand. What have you done?
On RX2, I did a female assignment.
Yeah, okay.
Walked around, took pictures, filled out the workbook, and then made a document, put it in the ODrive.
You still trainee or you qualified in?
Training. That's the one.
That's a solid 20 points for being a female trainee. You guys else? Think about it, Kyle. Think about it. You can get there.
20 points?
I forgot, man. I thought this morning too. I was like, oh, I haven't been assigned points yet.
I even have my task book with me.
Now you guys are just getting desperate. Don't be needy. Alright, so what have you been doing then? What have we been doing if we haven't been doing monitoring? We've been implementing, right? We're walking away from it. That's okay. But we do need to start changing that, and I guess I implore you to just be aware. There's so many things with this class. Just be aware that it is important, especially that FEMO stuff. Now, honestly, that FEMO, I love that. I mean, I do it a lot just on burns just because I don't really have anything else to do, so I'm like, I'll be the FEMO. But I used to like to do it before because it's so cool. You don't have to be dragging a torch. You don't have to be sucking smoke, holding the line, because that's, you get to be out ahead of the fire. You get to go back. You get to walk around wherever you want and take notes, right? So you have that obligation. But, I mean, that's how you learn about fire. I mean, there's lots of ways to learn about fire, but just your job is just to watch the fire all day and look at the effects. If you're not into that, I can't help you, man. But it's a cool position, and it's something we need more of. So, I definitely urge you to do that. And then, ask the fuel techs or whoever's doing, ask the biologist, hey, can we take the engine out and go do some botany monitoring someday? I would urge you to do that. Hopefully Cal would suggest it. The chief would approve that. I don't know. You think Freddie would let you guys do that? Probably. No, he's not there now anyway. Yeah, he would.
February.
There you go.
February.
Okay. Have they announced that detail? Oh, they got a detail, right? You put it
The
in?
announcement just came out.
Yeah. I don't know if I qualify for that.
Okay, so local knowledge. So I wanted to talk about local knowledge, right? And this is an important one. It's not true monitoring, but it's definitely data. There's a lot of qualitative data. What's qualitative data versus quantitative data?
Quality.
Not quality, although that can factor into it, I suppose. So there's a difference, and I know I've probably used this term already.
Experience.
Yeah, qualitative is very much experiential, but it's, if you think about, let's move to the other term, which is the opposite of it, which is quantitative. Quantitative is like you're following a process, you're taking data, you're measuring. I mean, it's very discrete. Qualitative is just like, it's your experience, it's your anecdotes, it's your stories, it's the things that you built up through your time. That's qualitative. Is there value to it? Can you use that qualitative data? Like everything you have in life that gets you, through your day is you're using that qualitative data, and it can be a very powerful source of information. It's like, it's the value that have when you find a guy that's been a firefighter for 35 years, and he's been around, and you start picking their brain, and you start saying, oh, that's cool, you learn that story. That's all that is qualitative data. It's like verbal or oral histories. But it comes with a problem, is because when that 35-year-old guy retires, then he's not available as that data source, at least as easily, right? And what happens when that person, dies? It's gone, unless it's been recorded. And that's why we have these like ethnographies and these living, or these, what is it, where you like interview someone for like several hours and try to get all that data, all that knowledge from them. You can't replicate it, right? At least not with current technology. You can't, and the other thing is it's subject to the limitations of recollection. So it's what they remember, and what do we know about memory?
Fades.
What's that?
It fades.
It does fade, and misremembrances. Like do you remember everything that ever happened to you?
Yeah, the fish goes from this big to that big.
Yeah, that's just fact. But that's true, right? Though things change with time, is what you're saying, and it could be because you want that fish to be bigger because it's a better story. That dozer line that you put in maybe it wasn't quite as crazy as you want to tell people or whatever, or maybe that fire wasn't as gnarly. But that's qualitative data. But it shouldn't be dismissed, right? You don't just take that out of hand. It's still part of the story no matter what. So what's the point of this is that, you need to try to find ways to incorporate this anecdotal information too. But, the more you can sort of document it and to get past, these are the things that you want to, there's value in qualitative data, but it needs to be timely. If you got to start writing that daily diary, you need to start writing your experience. Today on the fire line, I, whatever, did this, I learned this lesson. There's a lot of value. That's why people used to journal more, I think, is, so they would capture that information and pass it on to the future. So, okay, so I don't have the cool Japanese drift slides like Dan had. I kind of like his transition slides. There was that. So we're going to do one of those Japanese drifts and change subject here. Is there any questions about what we've talked about so far? All right. So with sampling design, this is where you've decided that you need to monitor whatever it might be. You have to create what's called a sampling design, which is how you're going to go sample that data. So what I urge you to do is you always need to know what the question is before you seek that answer. So you need to know what you're trying to get to, right? You don't just jump right to what you think the answers might be. You really want to try to dig into what it is you want to know. And then your sampling design should obviously follow from that. It should be based entirely on what the question is. I'm going to write that down. So here are some questions. What information, or when you're trying to develop that question, you want to know what is it you want to have. And this is important, right? So what is it that you want to walk away from? So you want data, you did a burn. What is it that you want to know after that burn? Because a lot of times you have to do it right the first time. You can't go and reburn a site. You can't go back the next day and be like, hey, we need to do this again. it's gone. It's too late. So you want to make sure you really know. You really want to know what the real question is. So here's a question, right? How old is the stand of trees? You guys walk outside here and you might ask yourself, how old is the stand of trees? But that's not really what you want to know. What you really want to know is when was this last stand replacing fire? So is that the same question?
Yes and no.
Yes and no. So there's different ways to get to that, and it's nuanced here. Follow along with me here. Asking how old is the stand of trees is one way to get to it, but really, when was the last stand replacing fire? It would be a different methodology. You know what I mean? So how old is it? You might be able to go core and try to find some, or last stand replacing fire. Your methodology might be doing a GIS survey or something. You know what I mean? How many tons per acre? That's a question we ask ourselves a lot, but from a fuels management standpoint, what you really want to know is what's the tons per acre before and after I do it. So if you just want to know what the tons per acre is now, okay, you can go and check it out. But if you want to do a comparative, you have to do it before the burn and after, right? Same thing for what's the fire return interval. What you really want to know is you want to know what was it historically versus what is it now, looking for those deviations. You see what I'm saying? So when you're asking those questions, make sure the question that you're asking is the actual one that will get you to the answer you need. Because just by asking how old is the stand of trees will not answer the question, when was the last stand replacing fire? What's the fuel moisture chemise? What we really want to know is how does it trend across the year? We ask this question, we're always asking this question. We're asking this question twice a month. What's our basis cover? We really want to know how does it change after the stand this thing. So, et cetera, et cetera. You guys see what I'm saying? So make sure you take some time with those questions before you ask them. When you go about actually sampling the data, which we're going to do a little of this today, you want to introduce what's called non-bias. So humans are biased. Was Ephraim and Stephen biased towards poison oak? Do you think they wanted to try to avoid it? So that's a perfect example of bias. Would someone who's immune to poison oak have poison oak bias? No, they don't care. They can walk through it and chew on it, just like you always used to see Dink doing, or whoever else is not allergic to it. So those are two different people, but they have different biases, and they're probably, if you ask them to go throw a plot through a stand of poison oak, are they going to do it differently? Probably. Probably the person who's super allergic to poison oak is not going to deal with that for the next 2 weeks for the sake of data. So you need to introduce non-bias. So you need to find ways to not be biased. It's almost like sort of defeating that human nature. And there's different ways of doing it, especially when you're just trying to determine number of plots or what direction you're going to go on the plots. Because a lot of times you have a transect, which is just a line, and you follow that line, and then you need to do a plot, and then maybe you do another line. Well, you have 360 degrees of possibility of throwing another line out, right? Well, you can throw a dice, you can look at a watch and just, look at the second hand, and whatever it happens to be at that moment. You can do dots on a map, random number generator. There's all kinds of different ways of doing non-bias. And we're going to talk a little bit about it when we go outside. You need to look at the equipment you need, make sure it's actually appropriate. If you're planning on taking the diameter of breast height in inches, if you take out one with that's in metric, that's not going to work very well, right? Make sure you have the tools you need, know how to use it, and then make sure you know the measurements. I actually had this, to my horror, after I went out for about a week giving my master's field work. Went out and did a week's worth of data. I came back and I realized that I had used the DBH tape that was metric the whole time. I was taking it in centimeters and not inches. That is a terrible feeling, and I never told my professor. I did. I never told him because I didn't want to have to redo it. What I did is I actually did I felt very scientific. I went out to the woods and I started taking DBHs in the centimeters and matching them up to what I had gotten, and then doing the same thing for the inches. I don't know why I didn't just do a conversion. I think it's different with the DBHs. It probably isn't. I'm not that good at math. I think I told you guys at the beginning. But anyway, I went out and redid it, and then I recalculated it. I hope John never watches this video. So you got to be aware of it. So that's a very salient lesson to me. You got to be aware of what you're doing. I think I actually tried to do a conversion, and for some reason it didn't work. Anyway, it has something to do with like a logarithm deal. All right, so no questions. That sounded smart, right? Do we need a break or anything? We good? So you need to know, I'm going to continue with these known questions. How are you going to process the data? This is actually really important if you're going to take data. And this is sort of like, to relate this to the burn stuff, you need to know what are you going to do with this data. But if you're going to take statistics and data, it's no good actually to, I mean it's good, it's better than not doing it, but you need to know how you're going to process it. Because a lot of times what you'll find when you're taking data is that you might take it, but the format you take it in, it might just be extremely difficult to translate that to a spreadsheet or a processor. So knowing how you're going to take it and even knowing how you're going to record it can help out a lot. It can make your life easier on the processing side of the house. Is it going to be an Excel spreadsheet? Is it going to be paper? Is it going to be photographs? Whatever. And then how big of an area do you need to sample? See if you guys understand this principle. So would you need to sample more or less if a site is really heterogeneous or very variable, if it has a high degree of spatial complexity? And we talked about that in the bioregime factors. Would you want to do more sampling or less sampling if there's a lot of variability?
Spatial.
More.
Why?
You're looking at, you have a site that has variable vegetation or whatever, you have to account for all the
The
different
answer's
types.
in the question.
Yeah.
What's that?
The answer's in the question.
It is, right? The answer is
a lot
in
of
the question.
variables and a lot of samples.
Yeah, but you guys still have to work your way through it, right? So, yeah, you have just like a stand of trees and just different stuff all over the place. Yeah, you definitely need to sample more to be able to capture that variability. And that's what it comes down to. It's called sampling intensity, which is like the amount of data you're actually taking. Or anywhere from 100% sampling intensity, which means you're measuring every stick and every bush and every plant that's out there, which sometimes you have to do that level, versus a very low level sampling intensity. So what would be a good example of a homogeneous site that would require, or that wouldn't require as high a level of sampling intensity?
Some big sage field in the basin.
Yeah, big sage field, would you say?
A field like a grass field?
Yeah, like a grass field. The sage, that actually would work pretty well, but I always think of grass. Like, if you have a 100-acre plot of grass and it's all the same grass, do you need to do 1,000 plots out there to pretty much get the idea of what's out there?
Even just a bunch of manzanita,
Yeah.
same thing, or?
A lot of our chemise chaparral stands are pretty homogeneous, really, if you look at it. Certainly the Great Basin is. You just need to make sure it's enough of a sampling intensity to be able to capture what's out there. And there's ways of getting into that, and there's some statistical analysis, which we're obviously not going to get into it. I just want you guys to be aware. Again, this is an awareness thing. I'm not teaching you how to do super detailed sampling intensity questions, but you need to be aware that this is a concept, and if you find yourself trying to develop monitoring, we can get you those tools. Just need to know if you take enough data to satisfy the question, and that's really what it comes down to. That's the worst thing, is you take the data and you still can't make a determination of whether you answered your question or not, right? Like, that's terrible, because then what do you have to do? Go out either again or go out and take more data. Which is
Change the question.
I didn't want to know the answer anyway. Oh, you're turning into quite a scientist. That's a negative 2 points. That's right, what I give I can take away. Alright, so do we need a break yet, or are you guys good? Are we holding up? Hasn't even been an hour yet. You guys are good. I want to get through this part before we start going outside. I did forget to mention that we got to get through a little bit before we start in with the fun stuff. So this is important too for us, and it's the most relevant. Most of the sampling questions, they come from the objective section of implementation documents. So what's an implementation document versus a planning document?
Like a scope of work,
A scope of work for like a contract?
like a project, or
Yeah.
contract agreement.
Yeah, that would be an implementation document for sure, because you're implementing the work. What's another good implementation document example? A burn plan. It's a classic example. So that's what's called an implementation document versus a planning document. What's a planning document? Some examples.
NEPA.
NEPA, baby, yeah, it all comes out. That's the main planning document. So breaking this down, so most project sampling questions come from the objective section of the implementation document. So there's always objectives in a burn plan. There's always objectives, should be objectives in a contract too. So your sampling should be coming from that. Or it could come from the NEPA or the planning document. but the implementation documents flow from the planning document, so this should all be the same. Let's see, design criteria. Yeah, so design criteria sections of planning documents. Those, this is just what I was saying. You can find it in the planning documents too. Contract. Oh, you're good. You know what BABE are? Have you heard of that? It's biological assessment, biological evaluation. It's the biology section specialist report. It's the biology specialist report. And then there's the annual. Land management plan requirements. All these have their sampling requirements. So this is, can you guys read this? This is actually good, and normally people can't read it. This is from the Fry Creek burn plan. I think I wrote this plan. So most burn plans should have two types of objectives. There should be your resource objective or your resource objectives, and then your prescribed fire objectives. Obviously, your prescribed fire objectives are trying to achieve your resource objectives. The prescribed fire objectives just become a little bit more detailed on how you're actually going to achieve the burn. So from Fry Creek, there's actually more resource objectives here. Prescribed fire objectives, most of the, almost all burn plans have a consumption objective. Not always, but a lot of times they do, especially just like a pile burn plan. It's just a consumption objective. It's pretty straightforward. We want to burn 100% of the piles or 80% of the piles, whatever. So I wanted to break this down a little bit. To look at those sampling questions, right? And like how you might, from a sampling standpoint, break down these objectives and see if you've actually met them or not, right? So for this, let's see. Sorry, I'm not used to the animations. So for this first one, this first resource objective is use low intensity fire to protect the fine root systems, that's the small roots in the soil, and help to reduce the potential of erosion. The complete removal of duff layer is not desirable. That's an objective, right? So we want to protect the fine roots and not burn all the duff layer. What does that tell you from a prescribed fire standpoint? Are you going to put a rockin' high severity fire through there? So right away, you can't. So how would you know whether you've done it or not? Remember we talked about you go and sample before the burn, and then you're sampling after the burn. So what's the question? Well, someone phrase up a research question for me based upon this first objective. False start.
This would be something to the effect of what was the total reduction in duff layer thickness?
That's answer. Okay, remember that slide that said don't get to the answer before the question? You're answering it. What was it? But you have to formulate the question first.
So what is?
Yeah. It's Jeopardy, baby. What's that, Kyle?
How thick is the duff layer to start with?
Yeah, you need to know it to start with, right? To be able to get to that endpoint. Absolutely. So, come on, man. Take a stab at it. I won't make you do it for everyone, but
How much of the duff layer was removed?
yeah. Yeah, that's really what you're trying to know, yeah. I mean, everything you guys are saying is correct, right? But yeah, so the question is, how much of the duff layer was removed after the burn? Like you said.
I guess so the other one that you could throw in with that too would be, because you're removing that overstory in certain areas,
Mhm.
and if you had rains or stuff like that, erosion potential would also fall into that, wouldn't it? Because you're dealing with duff layers, and now they're being more susceptible to getting washed away versus depending on how thick it is. But
Yeah.
Would you have to pre-sample or pre-monitor to see how deep that duff was before you even burnt it?
Yeah, absolutely, because if you're gonna, I would think so. This actually, it could be better. It says the complete removal of duff layer is not desirable. I guess technically, you could probably say, it could be binary. Is there a duff layer now? And after the burn, okay, is there still a duff layer? It doesn't actually say here, like, you need to have a 3-inch or 4-inch duff layer. A better objective would say, retain 60%, 70% of the original duff layer. And that would allow you to provide have a metric where you could, if you need to retain 70%, you could burn, if it's a 10-inch duff layer, you could burn 3 inches off of it, right? Because that's retaining 70%. I can do math like that. So, okay, so that's it. Sample, duff, pre and post. That's it. Observe the fire effects. It's not that hard, but that's how you, otherwise, how do you know you've met that resource objective if you don't do that, if you don't go through this process? How do you know it's the burn boss or the project manager?
But
Really
right
don't.
now, I'm looking at it.
How if a super agro environmentalist comes up to you and asks you, "Oh, you burned too much of the duck," what can you say if you don't sample? Do you want to be in that position, or do you want to be in the position to be like, actually, I'm gonna pull out my notes?
Well, then you just say, well, the resource objective said not to burn it all off.
Well, in this case, yes. I'm pointing out that this is probably could be a better resource objective. This is where you, like, 2 years before the burn, when they're writing the NEPA, this is where you as a project manager can be like, hey, this is a good objective, can you put some numbers on there? Can we put a percentage on there? Because those are much easier for us to measure from a monitoring standpoint. Because right now it is pretty easy, is there a duct layer or not? Okay, all right, if you guys are comfortable with that, we can burn, if it's 10 inches of duct, we can burn 9 inches of it off and still meet that objective. You know, this is what I'm saying, you gotta think about this stuff.
Isn't a lot of it just a guideline though? I mean, because a lot of times you don't actually meet those objectives, or you mess them up, or whatever.
No, it's not a guideline. If it's in the NEPA, it's by law, you have to do it.
You have to do it.
Yeah, there's no,
So if you burn too much, then
you're going to jail.
you know what I mean, though.
No, yeah, if you burn too much, you're not technically, you're not meeting your objective. So
Yeah.
it's more of an ethical issue, really, a professionally ethical issue. Do you want to try to meet it? But it also can have effects later when you're trying to continue to do those projects that are so important to us. Because we're here because we want the forest and the trees and the, whatever our values at risk. Most of us are invested in that and want it to be in a healthy stand because we take pride in it, Otherwise we could go work for San Diego City. But they have the same thing. They want their houses and skyscrapers and stuff to be safe. They don't want it to burn. So they have their objectives too, I guess. It's just a different way of looking at it. It's a good question. So, let's see, next one. So for trees that are 8 inches or greater in DBH, so 8 inches or greater, mortality should not exceed 10% of the stand. Okay, easy. So what do? We assess the pre-burn mortality to see what the mortality is already, because you need to get that baseline, and then you assess the post-fire mortality. So you need to know what the sort of like the background mortality already is. You assess like, oh, it's 2%. Well, if you go in there and you kill 30% of the trees, which you should be able to tell. Not always right after the burn though, right? We've seen delayed effects, and conversely, trees that look like they're dead, they come back. That's why monitoring, we talk about this in the fire effects class, right? Is every fire effect immediately apparent right after the burn? How long can it take for some of these things to show up? Years sometimes, yeah. Some of the most important effects are the ones that show up years down the road. So and on down the line, prevent the consumption of standing snags and down logs. So what do? You observe the fire effects and see if the down logs, maybe take some photo plots of some really big logs. There's not usually that many big ones out there. Same thing for that, retaining vegetation and drainages, backing fire, make sure, that's something as a burn boss, you gotta look at these objectives. And we do a good job of it, primarily of making sure we don't, it's just part of our culture now to not just go to the stream bank and start ripping. But the reason we don't do that is really because it's in all these objectives to protect these riparian conservation areas, the RCAs. And then same thing with the prescribed fire objectives, right? So it's a consumption objectives, those are some of the easiest. If it's dead and down material, that's where you use those brown transects, which we're going to talk about later. It measures the fuel loading of dead and down. So you just do it beforehand, which we wanted to do. Maybe we'll have a chance to do, maybe not. And then you go and you do it afterwards. And it gives you a straight up percentage. So you guys get the drift? Picking up what I'm putting down here? All right, cool. Same thing with sports. You guys get this thing. So I'm just making a plug for prescribed fire monitoring. We've been advocating the FEMOs for a long time now. I do like to see, at least from your forest fuels officer perspective, I like to see people on each burn looking at effects, and that's their only job. At least 1, 2 is even better, because there usually is 2 flanks to a fire. We had a folder on the O drive. I need to update this, but I don't know where it's going to be now, so I don't have the opinion drive yet. And we actually have a folder that has the FEMO sheets, it has all the documentation that you need, like the blank sheets. I don't have any with me. I'll have to look to see if there's some there. But those FEMO sheets are the best because it just provides everything you need in a little booklet. You just grab a blank one every day and write in, and then scan it, dump it in the folder, and then we have it forever. And then prescribed fire monitoring does need long-term follow-up, which that's more of a project management standpoint. So pulling it together, what's the question to be answered? How do you figure out what's the question that you're really looking for?
Read it.
Read the objectives. Try to determine whether it's going to get you there, right? And you got to ask yourself what data do you need to collect it to make sure, you might go measure one thing, but you really needed to measure another thing, and it's not going to get you where you need to be. Figure out what your sampling scheme is, what equipment, how will you process it. These are all things you gotta do as part of that sort of like preparatory, that preparatory phase to get ready to do. So, all right, we'll take a break because after this we're going to start learning about some of the methodologies and start having some fun. 11:30. You guys want to take lunch, or you guys want to wait a little bit?
We're good. Started late. We're good.
What's that?
Started late. We're good.
Okay, cool.
Hey, so what test did you say your wife passed?
It's the board certification to be an occupational therapist. Yeah, so it's pretty cool. Yep, she finished her master's program December 8th. Took her test last Monday, actually.
Basically like a rehab therapy, right?
It's not physical therapy, it's occupational therapy, so it's a little different. It's different focus than say like PT. What she wants to do especially is work with hands, be a hand therapist. So it's kind of a specialty. But physical.
So creamy.
Alright.
Yeah.
They do. It's kind of like a. Triple. Do I want to do one of these days? You get an emu egg or ostrich egg and pickle
You remember when Billy hard boiled that ostrich egg? He said it took like he had to keep filling the pot up because he didn't know how long it was supposed to take. But the water kept boiling off, like he had to keep topping off the water. He cooked it for like he said like what he looked up was like an hour and a half.
Jeez.
To boil it because it's so big.
How did you know it was done?
He said faith. He like looked on the internet or whatever about hard boiling emu and ostrich eggs and it said like an hour and a half.
I was just saying, when they do like normal eggs, they kind of start to float or whatever. They get that buoyancy to them, or
You don't want to eat the floating one.
You have to float, throw them in the trash.
throw it in the trash.
Yeah, I think that's how you test if they're good or bad when you put them in the water. They should sink, right?
Yeah, fresh ones are all the way on the bottom, and then
The bad one.
the good ones that you really want are the little bit older ones, and they kind of sit up and then kind of float a little bit. But the ones that float all the way to the top are spoiled.
Yep.
Alright. Alright, let's
Pioneer science.
good stuff. Let's go ahead and start picking through a few things here.
Quantitative.
Quantitative.
Qualitative, maybe. Well, but you're putting quantitative aspects to it, though, right? Whether it sits up or not, or floats. That's very empirical. I'll play this game with you all day long.
Buckle up.
Buckle up! Yeah, whatever. Just put too many illustrations on here, what? I have a lot of time, Bowen. You're lucky you guys did it all. Alright, so we talked a little bit about transects and plots already. I guess just from a definition standpoint, to make sure everybody's on the same point. Same page here. A plot. A plot can be many things, but a plot is just a term used for an area that you're collecting data. Okay? So it could be anywhere from, like I said, mine was 6 foot diameter. You can do quarter acre, half acre plots. Obviously, the bigger the plot is, the harder, well, in general, the harder it is to do because you got more data. But depending on what you're taking, you might need a bigger plot. Because like if you're just measuring, like if it's a really open forest and you wanted to measure the number of stems, Well, if you had a very small plot, you might only get one tree in the plot, so you want it to be maybe a bigger plot you're going to capture. So, and they could be any shape or size, whatever, as long as it's the same, you know. And then a transect is just basically a line that you follow, and you can either take data along the whole length of that transect, and that sort of in effect becomes a plot, or it can be just the path that you follow, and like I said, every so often, every chain or whatever, you stop and you take that circled plot. Yes?
Isn't there a tool where it helps you create your plot? It's kind of like a binocular / magnifying glass thing, and you look through it, and then if it's blurred, the tree's blurry or whatever, it's like outside of your plot.
Oh, yeah, we're going to talk about that. It's called variable radius plots. So that's called variable radius. We're actually going to do that. It's wedges, we got prisms.
So is that what would dictate the size of your plot, or you can just come up with it on your own?
So what I'm talking about is called fixed, and we're going to talk about this. It's called a fixed radius plot or a fixed plot, which is that the size is fixed.
Okay.
What you're talking about is variable radius, which means that each plot is going to be differently sized. But we'll talk about that when I explain how to use the wedge prism. But for the most part, for right now, for what we're talking about for these plots, it's the same size. Yep. So we'll explain that. It's a great question. And that's cool that you know about this, and we're going to go play with them out there. So, let's see, where am I going with this? So up here, this is a transect. So, this has got this sort of a square here, a rectangle. You have strip 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, that's blurry to me, I'm telling you. You're crazy. That's a little clear. Yeah. At least to me, present here. So this is one way of doing it, is where you start with start here, and you follow your center line strip, and then you would go, see this arrow goes down, and that's maybe, and then see how this is distance between strips, 5 chains. So you start here. Usually you don't do your transect right on the edge of right on the boundary of a plot. You come in a certain distance. In this case, maybe it's like half of that 5, so maybe you come in 2.5 chains, then you start there. And the reason is because a lot of times on the edge of a boundary, like it might be a road, so obviously you don't want half your plot to be on the road because you're not going to take any data, or there might be a transition. So you usually want to try to get your plots and transects fully inside the unit.
Grid.
Yeah, kind of like a grid. So you strip down, strip back, and then you just go until the end. And so you just follow that pattern the whole way across it until you get to the end point. And that's the way you do transect. Do transects laid out. And that's just an easy way of just knowing. So you follow that, you follow that azimuth, and you just keep going. And you might stop. This is the same thing down here. We have your start, and you come in half a chain, and then boom, 1. That's your 1/4 acre plot. And then you go another. It says 4 chains here. Boom, another plot, another 4 chains all the way up, and then you go over. It says here 5 chains, so you go over 5 chains, and you need to make sure that you're not, overlapping your data. There's some strategies that allow you to do that. Primarily, when you're laying out things like this, you don't want to overlap your circles. So you see how these circles have a separation distance between them. You wouldn't want this circle to be overlaid on one you just did or on the other side. So it's all very regimented. It's a very precise. When you go out and you take monitoring data, a lot of times you'll have this. This is a sampling scheme. So that's one way of doing it. Howdy.
How you doing?
What's up, man?
Is this the 10385 address?
Man, I used to know
I
this.
believe so.
Is that right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. What you looking for specifically?
Telephone terminal?
This would probably be, unless it's the fire station across the way.
Could be the fire station across the way. Because
Yeah,
there's,
Sis
is it?
County and San Diego, Mount Laguna, so.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Those guys are there too, for sure. No, it's okay.
Because some places over here, Alpha or Bravo. Right.
And then there's a scale here too. So, so this is a diagram plan for a 10% systematic line plot using 1/2 acre circular sampling units. Okay, so break that down. You're doing 10% of this whole area of this treatment unit. You want to sample 10%. And you're using 1/2 acre circular plots. So each one of those circles represents a 1/2 acre. Okay, so it takes 2 of those plots to equal 1 acre. So there's ways we talked about how to determine how many plots. A lot of times you start with that. Well, I want to do 10%, 20%, and that's just kind of an experience thing. What we're doing for our fuels monitoring protocol for the Cleveland, which we're still developing, is I decided to do, based upon our experience doing plot data out here, is we're doing one plot, one Brown's plot, which is, I'll get into that, but it's every 10 acres. So one plot every 10 acres is our sampling scheme. So 100-acre unit is going to have 10 Brown's plots in it. That's not a percentage, that's actually just on a per acre basis. So there's different ways of doing it. But in this one is laid out for a 10% grid. This is showing where you can divide the whole unit into grids, and this is different ways of saying where do you want your plot to be. So you can take that same unit, it doesn't have to be square, it could be any polygon, and you grid it out with GIS, and then this is a systematic grid. So what you do is you would walk to that one with the GPS, walk to that one, and walk to each one of those. This is a random one. You use like maybe, you say there's 100 blocks here. You use a random number generator to choose 15, numbers. So you maybe block 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all the way across through 100, and then you choose 15 of them, and whatever they are, those are the ones you walk to. So that's why you have two right next to each other. Some individuals, those two next to each other. Does that follow? What's that?
I said like Keno.
Is that how Keno works?
Yeah, the numbers just pop up or.
Yeah. Yeah, so it could be exactly like that. This is a stratified random sample where you actually break, and this is one where you use where there's actually a lot of variability. Can you see how there's like lines? It has the square, but then there's lines that break it up into smaller units. That could be like, that's grass, that's timber, maybe say ponderosa pine, that's a big pocket of incense cedar. So you would almost break it up and do a stratified sample within each one of those fuel bottles within a larger unit. So there's all kinds of different ways of doing the sampling design.
On that bottom right one, the stratified random sample,
Yes.
when you do like, 10% of that, and 10% of that, and 10% of maybe.
Yeah, no, I would think you would. I think if you're taking the time to incorporate it and do the stratified, I think you probably would. And I think
doing
probably
an equal percentage of each.
And I think the reason that you would do that is obviously for the sampling to be the same. I think this assumes the same sampling intensity, but I think that what it allows you to do is to pull the data out and report the data separately for each fuel model type or whatever veg type you would be in. I'm not an expert in this. I'm not trying to pretend to be. I just know enough to be dangerous. But that would be what I would assume. Yeah, definitely worthy of more discussion.
Quick question, Fillmore.
Yeah.
So how you're saying your fuels monitoring program that's in the works, you said you're pretty much going to have one plot per 10 acres and then 100 acres, it'll be about whatever the number is. But, so is that going to be the location where you're going to monitor your fire effects after?
Yeah, before and after. That's the idea. So what we did was, probably should have mentioned this before, I forgot. So one of the things we want to do on the Cleveland, and I wanted to do for years, is have an actual dedicated fuels monitoring protocol, a fuels monitoring program. And we've had some meetings about it. We have some plans. I've got a whole flow chart, and basically what it is it's a set guideline that we can start wrapping into NEPA, start wrapping into implementation documents that says we will do this. So there'll be some accountability. And not only, it doesn't just giving you the hammer, it also provides you with the tools. So that we'll know when we're going to go do Browns, know where we're going to do it, how we're going to do it, how it's going to be reported. All the aspects that we're talking about. It's all wrapped into that. I'm hoping to put some requirements in to actually require a FEMA for each burn as part of the burn plan. Pre-data taken has to be taken, so that'll be a burden on the fuels tech and some other. But I'm also, we've had some university students coming in and taking data up here in Fry Creek, and they're starting to do some chaparral monitoring as well. So it's going to be basically a encompassing, holistic monitoring. We'll probably wrap the fuel moisture monitoring into it as well, since that is technically monitoring. But
So is the idea like on a larger scale or like a bigger unit, say you take, I don't know, data from the southeast quadrant of the unit or whatever, it might not reflect information on the northwest quadrant. Is the idea to get a bunch of them and then kind of average it out, your data, and that'll give you the big picture?
yeah, that's what
More
you
accurate?
do with the data is you take all the data from across it, or like if you take 10 plots, what you end up doing is you're taking all the data, smash it together, and then you get averages, and there's different ways you can interpret the statistics of it. But yeah, you start to be able to characterize that one unit.
Okay.
Yeah, like a total tons per acre. You don't report out all 10 plots at different tons per acre. You average it together. It's the way the browser works.
So, I know we had like 17A over by Thomas with us, and it was a 10-acre plot, and basically half of it was west-facing slope, half of it was a south-facing slope. When you do those, that's going to affect your loading based on?
It would, yeah.
So, but how do you calculate this slope versus that slope and merge them together? You just do the same thing, and then it's just going to give you a basis, or how does that?
There's different ways of doing it. Like if you really think it's that different and you want to know how different it is, you just sample them differently and report them out differently.
Oh, just break it. Okay.
Yeah, you just break it out. But if you don't want that, I mean, again, it depends on the questions you're asking, right?
Yeah.
So if it's just one big burn unit and you're going to burn it at once at the same time, probably I would just take all the data and collect it together and give you an average. You can also take all the data and then start to, like if you get every plot should have a number, you should know where it's at, record the locations and stuff. So you can start breaking up the data after you take it anyway. You know what I mean? You don't have to necessarily report it all together, but you can. Again, it just comes back to the individual question. Yeah. But certainly, if you see major differences in bench types, you could do something like the stratified sample, or just report it differently. Make sense? Okay. Cool.
Well, and with what you're saying, that 1 per 10 acres, if whoever's doing the monitoring, I imagine if they felt the need to do 2 in 10 acres, it wouldn't be a...
Yes, that's absolutely the case, and we've talked about that a little bit. It's like, this is just the baseline, this is, I think, what the lowest level of usable
It's
data
like the
is.
minimum amount of data required, and then if you need
Yeah.
more.
And my goal is to get most of those plots, put into place in 5 or 10 years, maybe hire a crew, hire some apprentices or something to go out and do it for a couple weeks every year just to get some of that data just collected. And then what I'd actually like to see is kind of what you're saying is doing some more plot data for project levels, like when we're actually doing the project, going and taking some more. And so instead of having to do all 10 or 20, they just go and supplement with 5 more or something like that. So, yep. And they just add it to the data set. We already have the GIS, our GIS guy has already developed the data set for it. We just need to actually complete the methodology. So it'll be a cool thing. Alright, so then calculating, I'm going to go through a little math here. How large is the sampling area in figure 10.2, which is this one? I think it's on your sheets, so if you want to cheat and look at the math, you can. But you should be able to tell how large this is by the data that you have. So there's 43 plots. So what we wanted, the question is, how big is this polygon?
43 times
438.
Well, let's go through the math. How do you do the math? You got 43 plots.
Right.
So how big is each plot?
5.
Just a quick question though, I mean, wouldn't you typically already know what that sampling area is before you would even start?
Yes, but I'm demonstrating it backwards to show how to do it. You're absolutely right.
If you're going to do a 10%, you're going to plot 10, if the total sampling area equals 10% of the total area,
Yeah.
and there's 43 plots, then it's 430 acre total.
Is that right?
Those are half
In between each in between each plot is 5 chains, right? Horizontally.
Yes. Yeah.
Vertically, it's 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,
21
8.
and a half.
8 times 5, 40.
You can look at it that way. Yeah, I suppose you could try to do it, but the polygon gets weird, and that's why it's specifically. So you're looking at this.
What is it, 21 and a half?
Start having it
acres?
divided into like triangles and doing Pythagoras there.
Between
You can do it that way, but you could.
15.
GPS would just do the area.
Yeah. No, that's cheating, man. It's just simple math.
43 times 2,
So 43 times 2 gets you what?
86
Which is.
acres.
Now I think you. So each plot is a half an acre.
It's a half an acre, yeah, so it's 21.5, and then times...
Wait, it's 21.5 what?
acres.
So
Of plot.
in circles is 21.
Yeah,
0.5
and then that's
acres
10%
plot.
of
So you
what my
multiply
total
by
is.
10.
10,
So you
you
multiply
get
that.
215. acres.
Is that right? Let's see. So it's 10% cruise with. Oh, is it fifth? Oh shit, I did. Oh, it's fifth. I can't read that. Fifth acre plots. Sorry, not quarter acre plots. What's that?
86 acres.
Oh,
Yeah. So 0.2 acre. So 1/5 is 0.2 is 20%.
Well, if they were half
Sorry,
acre
everyone.
lots, it would have been 250.
You're right. So 0.2 acres per plot times 43 plots equals 8.6 acres. That's the amount that's in there. So that's 10%. So you times 8.6 times 10 gives you, or divided by 0.1, it gives you a sample rate of 86 acres. So what you said is, wouldn't you know the size? Yeah, you would know the size. You should know the size. So you just do this backwards. If you have an 86 acre, you know how big your plots are going to be, right? You know they're going to be 50 acre plots. You just do backwards. 86, you see what 10% of that is, 8.6. So I want 8.6 acres in plots. And so what is that? You know, 0.2 gives you 43 plots. So yeah, it goes both ways. But since we already had the data to start with that and do it backwards, I'm just showing you that's how you do it. And there's all kinds of different strategies or whatever. It's fun. I gotta throw a little math in from time to time. Otherwise you guys get bored.
No.
So no, yeah, oh, that's right here. Oh look, that's pretty smart. How to figure out a 10% cruise, and this is really what you guys would be doing. Take the known area, times it by 0.1, which is 10%, divide that by 0.2, or 1/5, and that gets you 43 plots. So you know you need to do 43 plots spread out. You guys know that.
What's the cruise again? Like walking or?
A cruise, oh, I'm sorry, yeah, a cruise is just a forestry term for just walking. 10% cruise, it means you're gonna survey 10% of it. Sorry, yeah. Thank you for asking that question. I'll put that in there. Who's gonna do the definitions, Bo? You write it down. I know whenever I say something you don't understand, you write it down for your project. It's a point for every definition. Okay, so diameter of breast height. So let's get into the stuff where actually you go out and measure. You guys have heard of DBH or diameter of breast height? You guys probably all heard that term, right? So diameter of breast height is an actual official forestry term. Did you guys know that it's technically 4.5 feet? It's technically 4.5 feet is the actual where DBH is supposed to be taken because you all are differently heighted. What is it? Vertically challenged or whatever. Oh, my wife has all these PC terms. You guys heard of the new PC term for afraid of heights? Gravitationally insecure. Like this is like what professionals are using in the world because everyone's a bunch of snowflakes. Gravitationally insecure. Anyway, so the way that you measure it is different ways, but the main way you can either use a stick, a diameter stick, which we don't have, or you can use these measuring tapes, which we do have. And, I got a couple here. So when you pick up a DBH tape, what you want to do is you want to know whether it's metric or standard. So you can look at that. It says 20 feet on here, and I think then you can actually look at the tape, and some of them have two sides. A lot of them have two sides. It's a steel tape, it just winds, and on one side is the DBH, and the other side is actually some will have DBH inches and DBH centimeters on the other side. Some will, like this one, has DBH inches and regular inches, which is not the same thing. You guys know why it's not the same thing?
Just got a tiny bit.
No, I meant like you know how people like there's like these like spelling bee challenges. Remember the number potty? So anyway, so it's the standard measurement of the tree's diameter. So this is if you go out and you actually want to do it or need to do it. So there's different techniques. Just a regular old tree on level ground, 4.5 feet. If you do it on a slope, you want to do it from the upper side. If it's leaning, again, you also want to take it on the upper side, the lower side. If it's like a forked tree, you just kind of do it below the fork. Obviously, it needs to be the entire tree because you don't want to include this empty space in between for the diameter. Let's see. Oh, that's for if it's forking above 4.5 feet. If it's forking below 4.5 feet, you actually need to measure it as 2 different stems. Make sense? Yeah. And then if there's deformations, just move it. Like if it's really like bulging or like a big conch or something like that. Yeah, just go above or below as close as possible to it. So that's how you do it.
No more than 12 inches, I think.
What's that?
More than a foot.
Yeah, what is it that you? What paper is it that
I
you
can't
use?
remember what it is. I have it saved on my laptop.
Okay.
It's 1 foot above and 1 foot below.
Is that what it is? I like it. Then you talk like a portion. Okay, let's go with that. So there's a defect foot above or below. That actually sounds familiar. Very
I
good.
was talking about in the bottom there, on the edge.
Yeah, so like it'd be above that. That's very good.
So with the skull mark,
Yeah.
the one below your 4.5 feet, so you go 4.5 feet, and then from that, it's showing what, like, it's hard to read, but it goes up how high into the next, like, where the split is, like, you're going in, because you're doing those 2 different stems.
Oh, here. I think it's in general what I've been told is just as close as possible to that 4.5 feet is what you're looking for. So you don't go 4.5 feet up above the creek. You really are looking for that ground, that level. So usually what I've done is just enough to be able to actually get the tape through the creek.
That one looks like it says 3.5 feet above the termination of the split.
I see that, but I don't think that's an actual rule of thumb. I think it's just. I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm not like the world's biggest expert on this. I'm doing the best I can. I did take a mensuration class, but we'll think about it though. Why would it be 3.5 feet? Just break it down. Why would it be 3.5 feet versus 4? What if it's not split? What if it's still together at 3.5 feet? I'm just trying to insert a little, common sense and practicality. I don't want you guys to get bogged down on these like.
Are they thinking that
what I'm saying.
they're averaging the bottom half a foot as a defect, and then they're looking at 4.5 above that?
Oh, taking it below? Yeah, that could. Yeah.
And then
Could this all go back to logging, to where if you have a defect, it'd make that piece of wood not be usable, you know what I mean? So there's defined.
Yeah, I could see that too. Yeah, could be from timber evaluation from a common stand exam tools. Yeah, I guess that's what I get for just pulling it out of the book and not having the book. That's a good question. I'll give anybody 10 points if they want to research it on their own. Come up with their own answer. Well, I've done a lot of sampling, and like I said, what we've always done, we've always just, as soon as you could get that deviation, that's where you take it on these fucking trees. You know what I mean? And these defects and stuff. So you just gotta use a little common sense. And the more trees you take, these little minor aberrations in the data, they'll wash out. So no. And then let's see the last thing we'll talk about before we go out. We stop and lunch. We go outside and start doing some stuff. Is this concept of basal area? Have you guys heard of basal area before? You guys know what it is? Yeah. It's the cross-sectional area of all the trees. It's basically the area that's occupied by a tree. Okay? And then it's the area that's occupied across, a unit or a stand. And it's a way of putting it all together. So if this is a top view looking down on trees, and this is say this green box is 1/4 acre, 10, 11, 4, 14, and 12-inch tree, you're cutting them off. That's their cross section. And if you were to smash those together, and then figure out what this area is that's under the orange, that's the basal area. And so the way you do that is you do it individually by tree, by recording the tree, and it's pi times, and it's measured in square feet, right? Just like any area is a square value. So it can be square centimeters, square kilometers, whatever. And this what we use commonly is square feet of base area. So this is the form 400, it's pi dVH squared divided by 4 times 144, which gives you this calculation of 0.005454 times dVH squared. So dVH times dVH, so a 10-inch dVH would be 100, that's 10 squared. So, and then you multiply that by 0.005454. Always, that's just a standard formula. And that gives you, so a 10-inch tree is 0.54 square feet of basal area. It's about half a foot square, basal area.
Is that what you're measuring from branch to branch, underneath looking up?
No, it's the actual tree itself.
Okay,
Stand
so
itself?
it's the butt of the tree and not the canopy?
No, it's not the canopy. It's actually supposed to be a DBH. That's why we talked about DBH first.
Yeah.
So it's,
That's what-
yeah, exactly. So if you were to just take a tree, it's the same thing as if you were to like just cut a tree down, you know, and then cut it flat, and then you could do this. You could get the exact same measurement by just measuring a diameter straight across the whole thing. That would give you the diameter of the tree. That's one way to get, you know, the diameter. But in order to get the area, it's that DBH, the diameter squared, and then times that factor. That gets you the actual area. So it's not going to be a square, right? You can't just go. It's not the same thing as getting the area in a square, which is like the length times the width gets you the area. It's a circle, so that's why the best example I can give is like a 12-inch. So a 12-inch square gives you how many square feet? If you have a 12-inch square, how many square feet is that? It's 1. Yeah, because it's a 12-inch square. It's 1 square foot. Okay.
Square.
Yeah. Did I say feet? Inch. Sorry, so inch, yeah, because you get one square foot. But a 12-inch tree is less than that, right? It's 0.78. Why? Because it's round, it's not square. You have those, whatever it is. Because it's like center pivot irrigation, you have those, you know, around the outside edges. Yeah, so if you overlay a square on here, the only space that's occupied is within the circle. You have a dead space around all the edges. So that's why if you look at the 12 DVH, it's not equal to 1 square foot. It's actually less than that. You guys follow that? Okay, cool. And that's why you actually have to get to be about 14-inch DVH to actually get to 1 square foot and some change. So, if you add up these 5 trees, you add up their square foot, so 10, 11, 12, 4, and 14-inch tree will give you 3.15 square feet of basal area. So it's occupied 3 square feet. And then if you do it by plots, say this was, remember how I said this was a 1/4 acre plot? So how would you get to a 1 acre total? You just take that same thing and multiply it by 4. Yep, exactly. And that's what you do across a whole. That's why people do like 10% cruises so often, because you just take your data and then you just multiply it out to get a total. So it's super easy. So 3.15 square feet is actually for on a per acre basis, 12.6 square feet of basal area. So those 5 trees, you're sampling 5 of them, but there's actually 20 of them on an acre, but you're only doing a 1/4 of them, and you can sort of extrapolate. This plot data is all about extrapolating out. You're taking a little bit, but you're making an assumption about all the rest of the stand, so you don't have to measure every damn tree. That's the point of sampling. So. All right, you guys ready for a break yet? Let's tell you what. Let's talk about the wedge prisms, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll go outside. We'll take a break and eat, is what I'm thinking. Just like passing the drink. Kind of, yeah, will be good. So, wedge prism. These are also a little bit hard to get your head around, but once you do, it's kind of cool. This is a tool that you use, and the tool is, what you want to do is you're wanting to determine basal area. So we just talked about basal area. What we want to know is we want to know this basal area, but we want to know it without having to go and measure trees, because surprisingly, it's a pain in the ass to have to walk to every tree, measure it with the tape, and then record that data. It's just hard to do. You can do it, but there's some shortcuts, and that shortcut is to use this little prism. And what this prism does is kind of cool. It's a total shortcut. It's a piece of glass. You can see that it's fat in one end and narrow in another. It's cost like $300, so be careful with it. And each one of these represents, when you look at a tree with this, what you're doing is you're trying to determine whether this tree is in or out. And this is what Art was talking about. So take a look at that. Sorry, put it back in there. What you do is you stand here and see this little diagram here? You're standing back from a tree and you're looking at, you're holding your elbow out just a little bit like this, directly straight. And what you'll see in the prism, see this rectangle here? This is what you see in the prism. The rest of this is real life, but this is the prism. And what you'll see is, see how this is the tree trunk? The tree trunk is actually deflected. That's why that prism is angled. It's actually deflected to the left or right, depending on how you're holding it. And see how this trunk is completely outside of the regular? Imagine this is a plane that it has to come out of. That means that that tree is too small to count. And I'll talk about what it means. This one, however, you see how it's not deflected so far off to the left that it's completely outside of the trunk, in the real trunk of the tree? We'll play with this. That means that that is a big tree. So the way these things work is that the bigger the tree, the less deflection that you'll have. And so what happens is every tree that, see how this is a tally tree? Every tree that's so big that it counts, that it's not so far deflected that it's outside of the actual bowl of the tree, looking in your mirror, that equals 10 square feet of basal area. And it's called a basal area factor. In the size of trees that we have, we use 10, and all my prisms are 10, I think. So you have to be aware of that. There's 5, there's 20. When you're in like the redwoods or the sequoias, you want to use a much higher basal area factor because every tree will be in, and there'll be trees behind trees that you can't even see that are actually in and count. So it's just a way of quickly getting to the amount of basal area, the amount of area that's in, without having to action it. And what you do is you...
So once you identify that tree, do you still have to measure it?
You don't have to measure it, no. It automatically counts as 10 square feet of basal area. And what you say is you have somebody recording data. So I'd be with a circle and Adam would be there and I'd say in, out, in, and every time I say in, you just mark a number. And if there's 4 ins at the end of it, then you have, that's what you're looking at around you is 40 square feet of basal area.
You don't have to count the small trees at all.
Well, the only time you would count a small tree is if that tree was like right in front of you. So there might be a tree that's like only 3 or 4 inches, but if it's so close to your plot center that it actually doesn't deflect, it actually counts as 10 square feet of basal area. There's just like this crazy algorithm that's behind it that it's based upon the distance of the tree to you.
So what is that appropriate distance? And is this also holding the prism at arm's length?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's like maybe around 18 inches or so. Just bend your elbow slightly and hold it up to your eye level.
And then what about distance from the actual tree being tallied?
Doesn't matter. But that's why it's called a variable radius plot. Because remember, everything is a quarter acre, and that's very set. You could have trees that are 100 feet away from you that are in because it's very big. Or you might have a tree that's right in front of you. There actually is no outer distance to the plot. It's just everything that you can see. What you'll notice is that there becomes sort of a circle around you at distance based upon the average size of the tree. So like I said, you might have like a sequoia like 500 feet away from you, and it would still be big enough, like maybe 6 feet in diameter to actually count.
Other trees will be blocking your view from another tree, so you only get some trees in your...
Yeah, that factors into it as well too. Have you used these before?
No, I
Just thinking about it.
yeah.
Yep. And what I have found is that our data that we've taken, like the hard way versus the prism data, up on Laguna here, it tends to be very, very similar. Like we've gotten very good results with these 10 data factor prisms. So this will make a little bit more sense when we actually go out and play with it. You just have to understand that it's a shortcut and that each tree automatically equals 10 square feet of basal area. It's just a quick way of doing it. And it makes it a lot simpler. Obviously, this is only good for, like general data monitoring. If you're actually doing like an actual timber, like where you're going to cut down trees, you actually take all measures and stuff. But for our purposes, this is actually what we're doing for our monitoring on the Cleveland, is using these prisms.
If you look at the
pipe with it, it basically,
Does it work? Is it in or out?
it's in.
Oh, it's in, so that pipe, if that's a tree, at that distance would count as 10 square feet of visual area.
Where I'm at, just barely.
Is it in right on the line?
Where I'm at.
So you want to hold the prism, this is pretty important. You want to, what you don't want to do is stand here in a circle and go like that. What you want to do is you want to hold the prism and let the prism be in the middle of it, because otherwise you'd be skewing your data all the way around. So make sure you hold the prism and move around the prism so that it stays in one spot. And then just hold it flat and level, don't tip it, don't hold it sideways, because otherwise it'll mess with that angle, because you're reflecting light, or you're deflecting light, I should say, not reflecting.
Do they put those on monopods or tripods? And housing?
I've never seen that done. I suppose it could be done, but I've never seen it done.
They just eliminate that chance for error.
Yeah, it would. Yeah. No, it's one of these things you keep in your pocket and just kind of pull out and use. So. All right, so let's take lunch, and whenever we're done with lunch, we'll go outside and we'll start taking some DVHs and start playing with the prisms a little bit. And then what I'll have you guys do is, especially with the DVH tapes, this is the challenge I always like to give to folks is look at a tree, because we all like to say we know what a 12 or 14 or 16 inch tree looks like, right? So I challenge you to see how close you can actually get. It might either affirm you or humble you a little bit about how well you can actually call how big a tree is. So, all right, cool. What? Whatever, you probably won't bring it. All right, well, let's take lunch, and when we're done eating, we'll just get back together again. And
Maybe that was my problem. The other day I used Jamie's and she has one that is a 40.
Really?
Yeah.
A 40? She's not using it, is she?
No, it was just in a bag. Like, I don't know if she ended up with,
Oh.
she had like a 10 and a something. She had 3 of them.
Okay.
One was, had 40 etched in it.
Yeah.
You guys are actually using it?
It's the office.
Yeah.
One was like,
She might have ended up with it.
you know,
Yeah.
people with, well, she
going for lunch.
Stuff almost in the air.
The tree mortality?
The tree mortality, she might have ended up with it. I don't know.
How would you need a 40 even in the Sierra?
But I don't know if that, how they're numbered.
You're right, though, the number that's on it, that's the visual area factor.
Well, because this is the, it says CM30,
Yeah.
and this is a 20.
So,
So she had one that said 40, and it was like this weird kind of yellow.
yeah, some of them are actually, some of them are clear and some of them are orange. I don't know if that number on the front there should be orange. I've got one. That's still from the university.
Probably replaced it.
Probably.
Now, does this have it on the actual, because what if you got the package on this one?
Yeah, yeah.
10 on it.
No, they should all be inscribed.
Right.
They all.
So this is probably really expensive trim.
This is actually right. This is the thing. Yeah, this is the thing. See how much fatter that is? It's probably the default one.
It should make a lot of sense. What? Well, it just seems that, if, from here, that stovepipe counts as 10 square feet,
Yeah.
and it clearly is not 10 square feet.
But it's a representation. It's representative.
There's no way in the universe.
But it's not actually saying
I know
which
it's
trees are
saying-
actually, how many trees are, how big would you have to get to be 10 square feet?
Well, if 4 feet is 1. It's insulated boxes, but then like, even the boxes had like a thermocouple in them that would turn the power up. So it's like, you'd see like a fire truck coming and then the footage would kind of die. And then it would, the footage would turn off and then it would automatically turn back on later once it was already burned.
Yeah, because I took mine at Subi and it fucking Friday.
What do you go? Great.
GoPro there.
GoPro, sorry.
The biggest thing on it is there's a metal button on the end of it with a coil on the actual housing, with a coil that goes into the camera, which conducts heat straight to the camera.
So that's why that one that I was showing you, see it, was is heat resistant, water resistant.
How much was it then?
The camera ran about 125 on mine, and then the chip, however much you spend on your micro SD, and then the mount ran me like $30.
It's like a sturdy mount.
Yeah, it's not bad.
You screw on?
Mm-hmm.
Is it that generic like 3-prong?
It's a two-prong. It's a two-prong locks onto my helmet, like an Allen key, and then tightens it down. An Allen key holds in an actual holder, and it just locks down onto the brim.
Any footage of Renee in action?
Dendrochronology.
No, it's good. Maybe from the wheelie part.
Alright, let's talk about this. What time is it? I was just gonna wait.
Time to get a watch.
You said
Same
they're
time it was 24
Yeah, my
hours
watch
ago.
35. 135?
2 years past.
So dendrochronology, you may know. Oh, wait. I got a question about basal area and why we take basal area.
Yeah.
I don't want this to get lost because this is important. And I failed to mention it. So, basal area, it can be kind of a tricky measure to look at from a monitoring standpoint, but the reason you take basal area is because a lot of times you can use it, it's like any of this data, but especially basal area, you can actually use it as an objective to manage to. So for instance, here up at Laguna, we have a basal area that we're managing to, and that basal area is 80 square feet per acre. Okay, so we're looking for 80 square feet, that's in all the trees. That, however, has a limitation because it's only useful if you know two things. One is the basal area, and does anybody know what the other thing you really need to know from a management standpoint for it to be useful? Species. Species can matter actually on a per scan basis, but there's another metric.
Stand
Ground
age.
No, it's related to ground density though. It's stems per acre. Okay, so think about that for a minute. You need to know, so the basal area only tells you how much area is occupied by the wood, right? So I can tell you that there's 60 square feet of basal area, but that could be
5 trees.
5 trees, exactly. Or it could be 10,000 trees that are really small. That's why you need to know both the basal area and the stems per acre. And so what you can do is when you do a basal area management, that's fine, but you also really need to be looking at stems per acre as well. Does that make sense?
And what's the definition of stem?
A stem is just an individual tree
So
stem or a double form.
Is there a trick to counting those, or you
One,
just got?
two.
Yeah, it's pretty much 1, 2. No, there really is no trick to it. Most of the time what you do is, there's no like secret variable radius tourism or anything for it. You really do have to count it, do like a quarter acre plot, and literally just count the number of trees in that plot. If you're going to do that, you might as well be taking the DVHs as well, but that's how you do it. Or you can just do a transect and just do plots along it and check it out.
So you're saying 80 square foot basal area per acre? So,
and I don't know what I don't actually think there's a stems per acre management in our NEPA. I don't think they included it, but I'm not sure. I would be curious.
so that wouldn't have anything to do with diverse maturity? Okay, so you say that you're going for 80
yeah, actually, I'm sorry, it's 80 square feet of pine.
okay, so oaks don't affect that at all?
Nope, because there's basically, at least the management standpoint here is that every oak is a good, healthy, awesome oak. So they want as much oak as possible. So I'm sorry, yeah. And that speaks to, I think, when you guys asked about the species that are associated with the basal area. So that's why you really should be, when you're doing those variable radius plots, you really should be noting the species. So that one's in and it's a black oak, so you can have at least an understanding of how much basal area per species. Because that will tell you. So what's been happening up here, if you were just to take basal area by species up here on the unit, what would you have noticed the last 10 years? Do you guys know? Those of you guys that have been working up here?
Going down?
GSOB stuff that's going on with the
Yeah, GSOB has been hitting what?
oh the oak,
So what would you be noticing?
a lot more dead oak, and
You'd be seeing a reduction in time, a decreasing line on a graph of black oak basal area.
Does that go by elevation or timbered areas? You're not going to count the whole forest when you do that 80% or whatever,
80%?
or whatever the.
Square feet of basal area?
Yeah.
No, that's just in a given area, and it's whatever area
Oh,
you have. So if you have like we usually do it by treatment units, right? So we think in terms of treatment, like an 80-acre treatment unit, 100-acre treatment unit. In NEPA, a lot of times there's delineated areas, and then they'll talk about it.
okay.
You know, that in general is 300 square feet of basal area needs to be reduced to 100. I believe that there is a stem spacing guidelines, which is like in general they're looking for bigger trees in general 15 to 20 feet apart, stem to stem. And that's why I said, like, as you drive out, those of you guys that haven't spent a lot of time up here, look at some of the areas, especially further south on the mountain towards 8. There's a lot of really good looking stands. I mean, our regional ecologist has said that this is one of the best looking pine stands in the state of California because of the intense level of management and the amount of fire that's been put through here. And it's all managed by prescribed fire. So all this work that they're doing, it adds up. It's pretty important.
This is so fun.
What's that?
Well, those are affectionately known as the green tree killing sprees.
The green tree.
A lot of fun.
When you guys get to go whack the green trees?
Yeah.
Everybody likes whacking?
Jamie gets a case of paint,
Oh, yeah.
and we get a case of bar oil.
Yeah. That's fun.
Does the height of the stem play a factor in your data gathering?
The height of the stem? You mean like the height of the tree?
How tall it is, yeah.
Yeah, usually you're looking, like for stem management,
Depends on the question.
It's not really for fire management though, is it? It's more for
Forest
for resource,
for why we're doing this?
resource competition between the trees, right?
For thinning to a spacing, yes. In terms of your question about the stem height, it really goes back to the question you're trying to ask. If it's just a reproduction stand, like a TSI, it might be mostly saplings. But in general, when you're looking at stem per acre management, you're looking at mature trees. Not necessarily looking at reproduction. A lot of times the reproduction, which is the stuff maybe 0 to 15 foot tall, is managed differently.
Now, the other thing falls into, like, based on our 310, was that now that having that wider spacing, does that help reduce when it comes to what was that? Not the fungus, but the one that would kill the tree and then it travels the roots and goes to the next spore.
Root rot.
The black something.
I still want to call it
Spore, right?
funginosis. It's a gnosis that. God, what is this stuff called? No, the fungus that, or the fungus that Sporax is trying to prevent.
Yeah, it spreads through the roots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Airborne.
You said black, whatever it was that you
Yeah.
showed us.
Armillaria root rot. That's what it is.
But does that spacing help reduce that, or?
Remember, it depends on the tree species, whether the trees, remember the roots will graft with each other? Yeah, so that factors into it. Some do, some don't, remember?
Yeah, no, I was just figuring, if there's so many feet apart and if those roots are even close enough to...
Yeah. I'm sure that is in there somewhere, but it's mostly what you guys were saying, I think Lance was saying, it's competition. It's light competition, moisture competition, and then it also,
Nutrient.
it goes back to the fire regime questions we talk about, like how is fire supposed to burn? In order to have a frequent light surface fire, you have to have open stands of grass, that allow you to have those frequent fires, and then also allow it not to turn into a crown fire. So these open stands have these surface fires. it's always like chicken or egg. Does it exist because of it, or is it because of it because it exists? You know what I mean? Like, are there frequent fires in ponderosa pine stands because it's open, or is it open because there's frequent fires?
Yes.
Yes. I think that's the answer. You see what I'm saying though? It's the same thing here. So you need to know stems per acre and the seasonality, but stems per acre is much harder to do too. Does that answer your questions? Does that answer your question specifically?
Yeah.
Why we want to look at it?
Yeah.
Yeah, because we want to be able to look at trends and be able to manage to something. If we want to manage to a certain amount of those areas. So dendrochronology, this is Tokyo Drift. This is looking at the study of dendrochronology. We'll talk about that, but these are some tools. This is an awesome Farside. You guys remember Farside? I like this one a lot because these loggers are cut down this tree, and then they're looking at. I think the caption of this Farside cartoon was like, and this is the year that the tree fought off this fire. The point of the joke, the irony of the joke is that the tree was alive for a long time, and then a logger came along and cut it down. Couldn't survive man. The ultimate, some morality there. I like to insert a little Farside, Gary Larson morality when I can. Anyway, and so this is also two ways to determine. If you want to know how old a tree is and what factors have gone into how that tree grows, there's two ways of doing it. One, you can cut the tree down and count the rings. Or the other one is you can use what's called an increment borer, which is also called coring a tree. You guys ever heard of this? Mm-hmm. See it? Never done it? Mm-hmm. Yeah? It's kind of fun. What's that?
Remember that guy that was from Arizona in our M410 class that was the dendrochronologist for the reservation? He did his presentation on...
M410?
Yeah.
Did we take it together? Like way back when?
Yeah, at the Bahia.
At the Bahia?
Yeah.
Sorry, man, it was a long time ago.
It's alright. There was one of the guys did his class on like this.
Did he?
Yeah.
I don't remember that. Did he do a good job?
Well, he obviously remembered it.
Yeah, obviously. Well, what did he do? How did he explain it?
Richard. Well, he was talking about the process of cutting like a slab off and kiln drying it and then polishing the surface. And
Yes. Yeah. Yep. And that's the way you can do it too. Actually, that's probably the third way you can do it. People will cut cookies out of it. Like they won't cut the whole tree down. They'll just take like a chunk out of it. And that's the way the real dendrochronology people do it. But they also take these these tree cores too, which we'll go out and do.
Keeps it from killing it.
Yeah, mostly.
Wouldn't that make it susceptible to like disease? And
Yeah, that's the question everyone asks, and it kind of depends on the species, but primarily, I mean, trees are usually, as long as they're a healthy tree, they can usually handle it. Especially the coring, like that's not a problem. It just runs some sap down and closes it off. Cutting a big chunk out of it, I don't know. In my mind, they're like, no, it's fine. I'm like, it's kind of a big wound. So, but I think they've actually done studies to try to answer that question, and the consensus is generally that no big deal, you can handle it. As long as you don't, cut around the xylem all the way around the tree, as long as you can still get food up there. Depending on the tree, it's fine. So anyway, the goal is to be able to, you guys have all seen this, like gone up to Yosemite, and they, it's got the tree rings in 1852, there's a fire. I mean, that's the goal of it. And you can tell all kinds of things from looking at these tree rings. It's dendrochronology is the science of studying tree growth rings, and it's not just to tell how old the tree is. Like that would get boring pretty quick, right? So it's really a tool to be able to tell a couple things. Past climatic conditions, so you can tell periods of drought. You can tell periods of like cold through the tree rings. Because if there's a bunch of what do trees need to grow? Water and sunlight and warm temperatures and things like that. So you can actually make these interpretations of the environmental conditions based upon them. But you can't just count the rings, you got to look at other things too. If there's observed weather, you got to, it's hard to do it just from one tree. You need to do a bunch of trees in an area to really get a good determination of it.
That's what
Yep, and then there's other problems with it. You really need to know how the trees grow. So like evergreen hardwoods and other tree species will actually put on more than one ring a year. So it can get kind of complicated in practice. So we're just going to talk about the general levels of dendrochronology. And the way we use it in fuels or in forestry especially is primarily just to determine the age of the stand, right? Unless you know when all those trees got planted or seeded in, which most of the time you can't, you got to go out and start coring trees to be able to determine how old it is. So the way that you do this is every tree ring, it has two parts, and it's called early wood and late wood. Trees don't actually stop growing in the winter. They just really, really slow down, okay? It's not a true hibernation. And what happens is, this early wood is this real light, airy, spongy wood, okay? And that's going to be the larger part. That is the growth, that's the main growth that it's going to put on every year in the summer. And that's why it's called early wood. It's early in the year, relatively. And then this late wood is this dark wood, and that's the winter months, the dark, the cold times when it's going really, really slow and that wood is really dense. So each one of these rings, a lot of people do that don't really understand it. They'll go, that's one ring, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They'll basically double the number of years of age that the tree is. You understand what I'm saying? Like they'll count each one of those individually. No, it's early wood and late wood is a ring. So that's why I have it divided here. You can see that line. See, that's one ring, that's another. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 years worth of growth here, not 26. Copy?
Yeah.
And this is from this piece of wood. Actually, this is another thing I forgot I had this. This is a piece of wood that I was on a fire in Oregon, and it was this big just cookie that these guys, they were just cutting trees down, and they just had this nice flat cookie about this big. So I took it home and sanded it down like you were saying, and it's cool. It has all this like rot and some of these things that is real. You can tell the rings. So anyway, so that's interpreting tree rings on a plane. And then you have this other, which is a tree core. This is an increment bore that we're going to do, a tree core. And what you're looking for is you're looking for the pith of the tree. And you can kind of see how that has like a ring around it. So we know how tree rings are, right? They're more or less in a ring. And so as you get closer to that pith, those rings get smaller. And what you're trying to do when you're aiming to the tree is you're trying to aim for the exact center. And you'll know it if you hit this pith. And then so basically this is year 0. You ignore that side of it, and you go towards the bark, which is the newest growth, because trees grow from the outside, right? There's the dead wood in the middle, and the new growth is on the outside. So you can see here the early wood and the late wood is one annual growth, increment growth. You always count from the pith out to the bark when you're counting the rings. Let's see. Oh, that's right. I put a little line on each ring, so you can see how there's variable. Some grew better in some years than others. This is where you can see the years. Oh, there's like 2 years of growth, or 2 years where there's a lot of growth. And then it slowed down, and then there's another year here, and then generally it's been slower. So you can start to make some determinations. So that's how that works.
So we do a drought.
Yeah, it would be a drought. Probably be a drought. So I'm going to do the next one, and then we'll go outside. So this next one is doing what's called let me make sure it's ocular. Yeah, it's an ocular measurement. So a lot of times what you do is you'll do these like subplot measurements where you're looking for, where you don't want to do a huge area. You're just looking for like a small square. Mostly you're looking at like a cover percentage. So for instance, if you're looking for like a cover of grass, percentage cover of grass, or a percent cover soil a lot of times, especially like post burn. If you're looking for, like there might be an objective that's like, you need to retain 60% soil cover. And what that means is 60% of the ground needs to be covered by something other than just soil. So what you can do is you can just take like these 1 meter squares, and there's different ways of doing that. I don't have one, but a lot of times you can just get like PVC. This is the best way to do it, is just just cut 3 feet, or 3 meter, or 1 meter, and then just get 4 elbows, and then it's kind of nice because then you can just break them apart and put them together as needed. And you just slap that on the ground, and then that's your plot, according to your sampling scheme. You know what I'm saying? And it's super light to carry around. It could be any size. It could be 1/2 meter. It could be 2 meters. However you want to make it. And that's the best way to do it. Or you can do it with a tape, like we're going to do. It can be pretty quick, down and dirty sort of monitoring, or you can do it to do like you can. There's some people like especially like plant people. They might do 2 of them a day. Like they might put down all these meter plots, and they'll literally be cataloging every single plant. Like they'll grid it off. And you're talking about 1 meter square. You know, you spend hours just cataloging everything that's in it. So you can, or you can just throw it down and like just do a quick sort of like it's called an ocular estimation. Like, yeah, that looks like 50%, 60%, 70%, whatever. So, but they're pretty cool to do. Fire, you can do it for consumption, especially like we use these on mastication. This will be in our fuels monitoring protocol. Will be for our masticated areas where we want to do mastication consumption. I found this to be very effective where you just throw it over the top of a masticated area, take a photograph or whatever. It's usually 100% covered. And then you come back after the burn, how much of that mastication was burned away. You know what I'm saying? And you can do it with a depth as well too. Species occurrence, it just means like, you know, is the species there, yes or no? Is that, you know, whatever such and such T&E plant is in there? Or wildlife service, you know, is there a frog in the middle? Is there a toad? Whatever. So this is kind of what it might look like. Imagine this box is your 1 meter square, red X's, yellow Y's, there's 5 of them, green blobs. So you're like, yes, 5 of those, 5 red X's, 5 yellows. Those might correlate to a species, you know, plant species. It makes you able to just do a tally really, really quick. You can use it for anything, but it's almost always used as like a percentage. So we'll probably go out there and let's see what we have out there, but maybe we'll do like a percentage of like leaf litter cover or something like that, just to kind of play with it.
Is this mostly for finer fuels?
Yeah, it's mostly going to be for finer stuff, for small plants, you know what I mean? Like that, yeah, totally. Because I mean, you need to be able to get the thing down on it at least a little bit, enough to make it work. Totally. So this is just an example. So what we usually have on the top left corner is what you have. It's like, say you're looking down on it, and you might have this plant, and say you're looking down, that's just representing the crown. Well, what you might want to do is, what is the percent cover? So, is it easy to determine what that percent cover is? Like, what do you think the percent cover on that square is? 15%. 15% cover? 10, 20? Remember how earlier this morning we were talking about like individual interpretation? So what I did is I took these here and I mashed them kind of together. So it's a little easier when you mash them all together because, you know, our brain automatically starts dividing things up. So what does this look like?
20?
Yeah. Is it about the same number? Because you're that good? You guys are probably smart enough to be able to. I did the same thing for here. You know, especially when there's more of it, it gets hard to determine. It's actually a little easier when there's less. So like, so that's it, and then these are the same polygons all smashed together. What do you call that?
40.
Is it half?
No.
So let's start, you know, always start with like, is it half? Is it quarter?
35.
35? Yeah.
Well, you could divide that too, also pinch into quarters. Like if you do it and just split it and
Absolutely.
give you a better estimate.
Yeah, that, but remember, this is the reality is you're going to have this. This is just like taking these and showing you what, you know, what it actually is, what you're trying to determine. But yeah, you could take these and divide these into quarters and try to do it that way too, if that's what you need. Yeah. Sometimes it's easier. Remember, like I said, sometimes they'll do like archaeological things, they'll divide these things up into like maybe 20, I don't know, tell me, like 20 grids or something inside a small one?
It depends on how big the area is, but like if you're doing like a small area,
Yeah.
there could be over 100 inside of it.
Really?
Uh-huh.
And it probably takes
I
a
mean,
long time to process.
you're talking about some of the stuff that they could find is like really, really fine.
Yeah. So how long could you spend doing something like that, going through that grid?
From what I understand, it's 2 to 3 days per square foot. Because you're also looking for seeds. You know, it depends on what you're looking for.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool.
Well, and they're also turning a lot into like they're using that for like mapping. Because
Larry.
if you find something in segment 1 of a square meter, then you're going to transfer that onto your site map into that segment of a segment, quarter of a quarter section.
Like drawing it in.
Yeah.
Yeah, the data sheet. Cool.
That's awesome.
Stuff's fascinating. Okay. Oh yeah, here we go. Got your grids. Yeah, that's one way to look at it. Okay, so let's go outside and play with this a little bit.
Ready to take the course?
You just don't break his doors off.
We almost figure out how old you are.
I know where to put it.
You realize the dark ages.
If you want. There. Take that. We'll give it
Hey, Steve, I'm gonna press stop on your.
Oh, thank you, Richard. Is that, of course, you Turn that on. So yeah, there's an instrument, and the way it works is like a little handheld thing, right? And it's a concave bowl, and it's actually got grid. If I remember it, it's got like a grid. You ever seen one?
Seen it in magazines.
Oh, okay. It's like a metal bowl. It's a mirror basically, and it's got these grid marks on it, and you're looking down, and it's reflecting the crown of the canopy, and so you're looking, and it gives you those grid lines, and you're just doing the same. Like it gives you like that circle, and you're saying that looks like 50%, 40% crown cover, and basically what you do is you usually go to like a plot center and you look at it and you do that estimation. Make sense? Or it'd be something if you wanted to do crown. If you really wanted to do like a crown closure measure in a stand, what I would do is transects and just walk along and like every chain stop, do a quick measure, write it down, walk another chain, that sort of thing. Make sense? Yeah, I need to get one of those for sure. Also forgot to buy you guys to go to gauges. I kind of suck. Okay, and then there's Browns, which is involved, but I think we can explain it because we're not going to do tons of it. I want to try to get you guys out of here by 3:30. Does that work for you? See if we can do it. So, Browns planar intercept method. Have you guys ever done Browns? Yeah? Raise your hand if you've done Browns. Like physically taken it. Because they used to teach it at the academy. I'm not sure if you guys are former apprentices. So, this is super important. This is actually, you probably should start with this because this is probably the most important thing because this is what we actually use a lot of times. It's used to gain tons per acre of dented down material. It's not an estimation, it's an actual measurement. And it's not that hard to do, but you gotta know how to do it. It's a much, like when we do, a lot of times our prescribed fire objectives especially will have tons per acre consumption measurements, like consume 80% of the 10, 90% of the ones, 50% of the hundreds, etc. The only actual way to determine whether you've met that or not is to do Brown's planar intercept method measurements both before and after. And this is what we do when we normally do like the thing tomorrow if we would have gotten together. We've got to do some Brown's plots. You can use it to develop very precise goals and objective statements because you can say I want to do 50%, 60%. You look at what your ton per acre is if you have that data, and then you can develop the prescription around it. That's why it's more precise. But it takes time to do, and very specific, obviously, and careful data collection because it is a scientific method, so you have to follow it. So what you need to do, and I've actually got some data sheets here. I'll show you. I'll pass this around. This is from last time we did this. So take a look at this. Is the Brown's planar intercept data collection form. And so obviously you tally the plot number. Each plot number has a number. You give it a number anyway. The slope, and it asks for the slope of each plot. Each one of these things is required. Like for the actual Brown's algorithm to calculate the data, you have to have each one of these. And slope is one of them. The slope matters. The length. I'm sorry.
What are the size of these plots usually when you're doing?
So these are not plots in like a circular plot. These are a plane. These are a sampling plane.
Okay.
So and that's a great question because in some ways what you want to know is the length of the sampling plane. In the Brown's guide, which might be in the back of that, and I'll give you guys a copy of it. It actually says based upon the fuel type and the veg class that you're in, you want to use different sampling lengths. But what we use here mostly is 6, 12, and 15. It depends. There's actually multiple sampling lengths. You don't, so for the 50-foot one that we use, that's for the 1,000-hour fuels. I think it's the hundreds and the 1,000-hour fuels. I don't want to get ahead of myself. Oh, actually, no. It's, I forgot. They include 1/4 to 1. So I don't want to get ahead of myself. So there's a length of the sampling plane is what you have to record, okay? And there's a place to do it. And what you're actually counting is you're counting the number of intersections of wood pieces in these 3 size classes. Those 3 size classes don't correspond to the time-lapse fuels. They're a little bit different, so you need to be aware of that. Okay, it's not tens, hundreds. It's 0, 1/4, 1, and 1 to 3. And then it's and so what you do is you actually end up getting for all the pieces that are 3 inches or bigger, which is a 1,000-hour fuel technically. You actually get the diameter of it. You actually have to take the diameter of a piece of wood on the ground. It's pretty easy to do. Most of the time, if it's a small piece, you can just do it with a ruler. If it's a bigger piece, like a big log, you actually have to use like a diameter tape or something like that. I'll show you. And then for each one of those 3+ pieces, you have to put it in a category, whether it's sound or rotten. If you look at the data sheet, it has sound or rotten. And then what you write down is the diameter of each piece in either the sound or rotten category. Make sense? Then you take the duff depth twice and the fuel bed depth thrice, 3 times on each one of these sampling planes. So this is what it looks like. I'll break it down here for you. So this dot, 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 dot line, that's your transect line, and that's the infinite one, right? That is actually not your plot, but it's your transect. So you're walking along that 180 degrees for a half a mile. That's your transect. Then you get to your sample point. So you always have a sample point, so you stop here. And then what this is representing is that this black line is actually your Brown's transect. And it's at a random azimuth off the transect line. So you might do all 4 directions. A lot of times what we're doing is we actually do all 4 at cardinal directions off this one sampling point. That's what our protocol is going to be. So you get to a sampling point, and then you were to take one sampling plane that way, another transect that way, another transect that way, another one that way. And then what you do in the transect, the reason that it has this broken here is because the longest transect can either be 35 or 50 feet. And we've chosen to do 50 feet. The reason you might do a shorter one is if you have a lot of heavy deadened down. Remember how if there's just a lot of material, you don't want to create more work than you need to. So our fuel loading out here tends to be, we need a larger sampling plane to get that variability. So that's why we use 50 feet. So that's your maximum. And then this 10 to 12, most of the work happens in the first 6 feet. You take depth twice, fuel depth 3 times, and then in the first 6 feet you take the 0 to 1 inch tally, okay, and that's the number of intersections from 0 to 1 inch. From 0 to, we do 6, 12, and 50. So from 0 to 12 feet, you're doing the 1 to 3 inch tally, just the number of intersections, okay? And then the 50 foot is your 3 inch tally. Remember, the 3 inches you do, it's the number of them, and you write the diameter and whether it's in the sound or rotten category, which you'll see in that data sheet. And that's it. That's how you do Browns. It's actually not that hard. We'll just go out there and throw a transect out real quick, then we'll show you what it looks like. And then, again, what I'm hoping is that I don't have this schedule. What I'm hoping is, A, I don't have to go to jury duty, and that I'll try to find a time and maybe just send it out to you guys and be like, hey, I'm going to be up at Lagoon if you want to come and throw some samples down, come and learn how to do this. It'll be an optional. Anything that's not already scheduled going into this, I tend to be an optional day. So, and then I'm always happy to come up to it.
There's a way to add it all up at the end to get the tons.
There is, and I don't know if I show it to you or not, because what we usually do is we just learn how to do it first, and then in a later unit we actually do the calculations. We go take the data and show you to it. What I did is I actually created an Excel spreadsheet that has it. Just all you got to do is enter the data raw, and it's super easy to do. And I'll show you that. It's actually pretty fun to do.
So the difference between duff and fuel depth is, like if it's grassy, that's your fuel height, or brushy, or...
Yep.
Or just a bunch of slash, would that one be depth, that'd be fuel depth?
I'm going to go through each one of these.
Okay.
So let me explain it to you. So the sampling plane length, remember I said, so this is pulling from the Brown's book, which is like the book how to do it. Like I said, we'll do 6, 12, and 50. You choose your sampling length. So it tells you, and it's all about what you're in. So for non-slash, which is just natural material, discontinuous light slash or continuous heavy slash, there's differences. You're going to want to use 6, 10 to 12, 35 to 50, 6, 10 to 12, 35 to 50, or 3, 6, and 15 to 25. That's if you're in a ton of slash. You want to use a smaller sampling plane. That's what we just said, what I just said. But I'm giving you the direction that we use 6, 12, and 50. This is fuel bed. This is showing what an intersection is. And so what you have to imagine is you have our sampling plane, which is this tape. Okay, so we lay this tape out on the ground, and this tape is, for all intents, a 3-dimensional object, right? But what we're looking for is a 2-dimensional plane. So you see how there's 2 sides to this tape. You have to choose one side, and it has 0 depth, but it only has height up into the ground. Okay, so put it on the ground, and there's just like, I kind of like to imagine it as like a glass sheet that has no depth. It's just a sampling plane, and every piece of wood that crosses that sampling plane is is called an intersection, because it's intersecting with that sampling plane, and it goes up to infinite height, technically. And that's what this, see how it kind of looks like a window pane? Okay, this is from the book, and see how it's like cut off at that window pane? That's what it's trying to illustrate, that these are, you can kind of see these like behind the window pane, it's kind of opaque, so that's an intersection. Each one of these little circles is an intersection because it interacts with that plane. It's like going through the gate at Stargate. What a Stargate. How about that one? That's a good one. Yeah, alright. You guys are tired, aren't you?
Alright.
That actually really hurt. I think I'm good. And this is showing it the same way, where you have your sampling plane. So this is actually fuel bed height. It's showing the same thing. All these little circles are these pretend branches that are crossing the plane. But for your 1 foot wide vertical partitions, remember how you did fuel bed height 3 times? It's actually divided into these partitions, and the tallest one within each one of those 1 foot partitions is your fuel bed height. So this stick that's the tallest, that's your height, so you measure it from a height standpoint. Each one of those 3 times. You guys copy? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Then you take the average from those 3?
Now you record all 3 of them separately. Look on the data sheet.
Yeah, no, I was saying like to figure out like.
Oh, later, yeah, it adds them all up. Yeah, much later. This is that data collection sheet. This is actually the original one. Let's see. So the length of the sampling plane there. It starts with plot number, slope, number of intersections for the quarter, 0 to quarter, quarter 1, 1 to 3. Your duct depth, the first and the second one, and then it has your 3-inch diameter. And this is recorded a little bit differently because this is number of intersections, like 2493. Those aren't diameters, right? Duct depth is measured in inches, and then diameter is also measured in inches. And each one of these lines is one individual piece of wood. Okay. Versus like you're only going to have one line for a duct depth. 2 observations. So that.
And then what if you have more than, so like with your sound or whatever?
So if you have more, like this one shows it has 4, you just go down to the next line. See how this says plot number 1 and 1? So almost everything is going to be on this first line. Number of intersections, depth observations, and then over here fuel bed. The only ones that can go lower if there's more than 3, because it gives you 3 lines for sound and 3 for rotten. There's 4 here, so that it just ducks down onto the next line. And that's a diameter. For rotten, it shows over here there's only 1, which is, I guess, 2.5. And then fuel bed height, or depth, whatever you want to call it, right there. You guys following so far? Okay. So, I just want to say real quick before we go out there, it's a field data collection, like actually writing down data. This is important. You want to obviously be careful and deliberate and consistent. Use pencil so you can erase things, because a lot of times you have to. Writing the rain notebooks are good, have a clipboard. And the most important thing is decimals. Do not use fractions. So if it's 2.5, do not write 2 and 1 over 2. You have to use decimals. And the other thing is do not use or do use zeros. So if it's a 1/4 inch, you don't write 0.25 because that little dot can get lost and very easily turn into a 25. You always write 0.25, 0.5, 0.175. And it's simply from when you're processing this data, you don't want to miss those little decimal points because it'll throw your data way off. Okay, so write legibly, use the zeros, and then this is that fuels data repository on the Go Drive, so sorry I don't have anything for you. Alright, so the exercise, what is this? We're just going to go outside and do this. I think what I'm just saying, this is what we ended up doing at Fry Creek. We went out and had them take browns. I gave them all the points to go look at. They went and did it. This is what the actual data sheets look like from Fry Creek. Yeah. This is the variable radius plot sampling sheet. So this is variable radius for the prisms. And so plots, they did 5 plots, number of truths tallied. So if it was a 10 BAF, what's the basal area on each one of these plots? So just multiply each by 10.
50 by 50, 60.
So 50, 60, 110, 100, yep, exactly. That's the beauty of those variable radius of prism plots. Super easy to get the data. So, again, this is the 5th day assignment. All right, let's go outside and do browns, do a plot or two, show you how to do it, and then show you done with it. Good? What's that?